9:30, so this Darlington Local Plan Examination hearing session is open. I'm William Fieldhouse, the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out an independent examination of the Darlington Local Plan. So we've got this morning's session to deal with some aspects of housing development and housing supply. And like all the others, it will take the form of a structured discussion of the matter set out in the agenda. Before we start that, I'm going to go through some someone has got their microphone on with some background noise, so could you all make sure you've please got your microphones turned to mute. You'll be aware, I hope, that my examination guidance note IN1 was published in January and guidance note for participants IN6 was published 13th of May. So I hope you've read those and are familiar with them. Just a few reminders. I'm going to do a shorter opening because I think everyone, or the vast majority of people, have either been here or have watched the proceedings on YouTube. So only one person to speak at a time, please. So if you're not speaking, it's best to please make sure your microphone's turned off. It's also best to have your cameras turned off when you're not speaking. But if I know a number of you got them on at the moment, which is fine because we're going to do introductions. But I think after we've done introductions, best if you turn your cameras off because it helps with preventing connectivity problems. We won't be using the Microsoft Teams share documents facility or the chat function. So I'm going to go through the list of participants, if I could, please, that was attached to the agenda that's been published. I'll start with the council. Mr. Hand.
Good morning, sir. Yeah, David Hand. I'm the head of planning policy, economic strategy and environment representing Darlington Borough Council. And
David Nelson.
Morning, sir. David Nelson, Principal Planning Officer representing Darlington Borough Council.
And Fiona McCall.
Good morning, sir. I'm Fiona McCall, Planning Policy Officer representing Darlington Borough Council.
Matt Usher.
Good morning, sir. Matthew Usher, Planning Officer at Darlington Borough Council.
Andrew Casey.
Morning, sir. I'm Andy Casey, Head of Highway Network Management at Darlington Council.
David Coates.
Good morning, sir. David Coates, Head of Development Management and Environmental Health.
And Andrew Harker.
Mr. Harker's not here today, sir.
It's just you, Mr. Coates.
It is indeed, sir. Yes, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the council before I move on to others? No. Okay, thank you. Helen Heward.
Morning, sir. Helen Heward from Planning House representing Blackwell Grange Hotel.
Michael Green.
Morning, sir. Morning, all. Michael Green. I'm a resident of Blackwell Parish and also a ethnographic study which has looked at the effect of new build on existing communities. And I'm one of the coordinators with Parkland Heritage Network, which represents a number of groups. Blackwell Parkland Heritage Association, which was formed in 2013, Love Darlow Trees Network 2018, the Blackwell Action Group 2014, and Darlington Friends of the Earth, all of whom support the Townhouse Resolution, which is to protect, preserve and enhance the historic Blackwell Parkland.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. Joanne Garrick.
Hello everyone, I'm Joanne Garrick. I'm representing Low Coniscliffe and Marybend Parish Council.
And Councillor Gilsonan.
Good morning, Councillor Catherine Gilsonan, Middleton St George Parish Council.
Good morning, Ken Madison.
Good morning, sir. My name's Ken Madison. I'm one of the lonely residents representing myself. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Stephen Litherland. I think he may have sent apologies. Okay, thank you. Tom Baker. Tom Baker was there. He's gone off.
Good morning, sir. Sorry about that. Yes, my name's Tom Baker. I'm of Savills and I'm representing Story Homes this morning.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Stephen Longstaff.
Morning, sir. Stephen Longstaff from ELG Planning, and I'm representing Bellway Homes in relation to Elm Tree Farm and Taylor Wimpey in relation to Coniscliffe Park South.
Okay, and Richard Agnew from Gladman.
Morning, sir. Richard Agnew, as you said, from Gladman Developments.
James Hall.
Morning, sir. I'm here for Bellway, predominantly in respect to the Great Burdon allocation today.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. Anyone else who's, I don't think I've got anyone else on the list. Anyone else there that's hoping to participate today?
Morning, sir. It's Henry Cumbers from Historic England, Historic Environment Planning Advisor. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Cumbers. I was expecting you actually, so thank you for attending, and apologies you were not included on the list. I think you're here in particular for the Blackwell Grange allocation, but is that right?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Right, and Mr. Bonner, sorry.
Morning, sir. Martin Bonner, Savills, on behalf of Helen's Land and Homes England.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Anyone else there who's hoping to participate today hasn't introduced themselves? No. Okay, thank you for that. So yes, if you could turn your cameras and microphones off now, and then when I invite you to speak, if you turn the camera and the microphone on, that's probably the best way to deal with it. Mr. Cumbers, yeah, okay, thank you. Right, so a reminder, as you probably already know, that this hearing session and all the others are being broadcast on YouTube, so you can watch that either live or you can watch it afterwards if you want to see, catch up on what was said. The purpose of the examination is to help me to decide if the submitted plan is legally compliant and sound, and if not, how it can be modified to ensure that it is. And to help me do that, I will start with some questions for the council on each of the agenda items. And we can hear their responses to those, and then I'll get contributions from others who wish to speak on that particular item. Please keep contributions to the point in response to my specific questions, and brief. As a rule of thumb, I generally say no more than a couple of minutes on any particular contribution, but that doesn't mean you can't necessarily come back and make another contribution on another issue. A reminder, as I'm sure you're aware, I'm examining the plan as submitted. A number of representatives obviously have put forward what I call omission sites, i.e. they're sites that are not in the plan. It's not my role to consider those, it's my role to consider whether the plan is sound. And if it's not sound, if there aren't enough housing sites or the different sites are needed, I would ask the council to consider putting forward additional ones. So if the site's not allocated in the plan, I'm not particularly going to spend time talking about the merits of it. Otherwise, we've talked about the sort of context in terms of the spatial strategy, the methodology for considering housing allocations and those sort of things, which will give me a basis for deciding whether the general approach to selecting housing allocations is fine. And obviously we'll talk about the ones that are specifically in the plan today and mainly. Okay. Proposed main modifications have been published by the council originally back in 30th of March, and also an additional schedule on the 24th of May, and hopefully you've seen those. So they changed some of the policies and details in the plan, and there's also an updated policies map that was published around the same time, I think 24th of May, that reflected the various changes that the council had suggested needed to be made to the policies map, and that it may affect some of the allocations today. In terms of the designations that relate to those. I will do an action point note following the hearing sessions. It'll either be the end of this week, beginning of next week, or possibly after the hearing sessions next week. Depends on what action points I identify. We didn't explicitly identify action points yesterday, other than a further session to be had on the skirting and allocation, and the council was doing some work with a couple of the site promoters to think about whether the policy H10 needed to be clarified in terms of the expectations or requirements relating to infrastructure provision that needs to be made in relation, not so much in terms of timing, but more to do with how it's phased with the different stages in housing development. But we'll pick up that, I think, at the end of today, just to get an update on what's happening with that, because that's something that's going to be discussed tomorrow afternoon. Right, so we've got this morning to go through the agenda items that are on the agenda that you've got, and we've got a separate session to deal with some more housing supply issues this afternoon. We'll probably have an adjournment this morning around about 11 o'clock for 15 minutes, so just have a break. We'll aim to finish about 1 o'clock. So we need to go through each of the sites that I've got listed. If there are any other sites that have not been picked up there, we'll deal with those this afternoon. Just before we start, though, I'm just going to pick up on a couple of procedural things. The council's housing supply information was updated in response to my supplementary question 5, and as was discussed yesterday, some revisions were needed to be made to that to reflect some further commitments that had been given planning permission before the 1st of April this year. That updated document was published yesterday afternoon. It's referenced DBC 6.2. And I'm just going to go through that in a moment with the council, but hopefully you've had a chance to see that if that's of interest to you. Another document that's been published, I think this morning on the website, which you may not have caught up on yet, is referenced DBC 12. And that is a simple table of the housing allocations in the plan against which, for each, it's set out which of the council's viability assessment typologies it would fall within, and the value area, the viability assessment value area that it would fall within. And on that basis, I can go through that list and see what their council's own viability assessment, which is document CD08, would categorise each of those types of allocation as. I mean, I don't propose to talk about that now, but I think we can pick it up in relation to each of the sites. But I suppose, having looked at it, what I note is that as the council acknowledged and was discussed in the week 1 hearings, there are a number of sites that are shown not to be viable by that assessment, but those tend to be in the low value areas and/or brownfield sites. And the council gave an explanation for each of those as to why they think it will. It may. I mean, some of them are already being taken forward. There are a couple of sites that are shown to be clearly viable, which are greenfield sites of a certain size in the high value areas. But the 2 strategic sites of Skirningham, which we talked about yesterday, and Greater Faverdale, got site-specific assessments. As I said, I've talked about the Skirningham one, and I've come to a view about what that says in relation to that. So the remaining 7 or 8, I think, housing allocations under the council's CD08 methodology would fall into typologies that are marginally viable, either just above, with a residual land value either just above the benchmark land value or just below it. So I think it's within plus or minus 10%. So that's the situation. But obviously we're going to have a bit more. We're going to discuss most of those remaining housing allocations today. And I'll get views about the viability of each. And we've got the council representatives here, and we've also got site promoters here that can give me further information if necessary about the viability of those. So are there any procedural questions before we start? So I'm going to start by looking at the housing supply information. So maybe if you've got questions about that, you could leave it. But if there's anything else procedural, please just put your hand up now, and I'll deal with that. No. Okay. So let's move on to the first agenda item then, which is the council's updated housing supply information. Just a quick summary, I think, of what the response to SQ5 as updated yesterday shows us in comparison to the plan that was submitted. The further information is that there were 537 net completions in 2020 to 2021. 13 sites have been completed. The remaining dwellings on the other commitments have been updated. Three allocations had got planning permission before April this year, so they've now been categorised as commitments. They're Bertree Lane, Berrymead Farm and Allington Way. There are 6 new commitments which are set out in the revised note, and they're highlighted in red font, so you can easily see those. And 1 commitment's dropped off the list because it's expired, i.e. the planning permission has expired. So that's that. I'll just quickly run through the figures with the council just to make sure I've got them right, and then we'll see if there's any other people who've got any comments about that. But just one other thing I want to just mention before we get onto that supply information, though, is that we discussed in week 1 whether the policy H1, which expresses the housing requirements with two different figures, one as a sort of a minimum requirement, one as a target. I'm not going to go back over the reasons for that, but I asked the council to tell me how policy H1 would be if I concluded that it should not be expressed as a range or as with two figures, but as one. So they provided that in response to AP6. So that basically shows is presented as a modification to policy H1, and that includes the figure of 9,840 dwellings being the requirement at a figure of 492 per year. So just to be clear, for the council's position on this, is it suggesting that the plan be modified to include that amended policy, or is its position still that the submitted plan is sound with the two different figures included in it? Someone from the council just confirm that.
Sorry, sir.
Okay.
I just, yeah, I mean, our position is obviously after you suggested a modification that we've put forward that modification in case you feel that that's required. Our preference would still be to protect the interests of the council to maintain the range.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to check that. Thank you for clarifying that. I think we'll come back to that because in terms of when we later today, we're going to talk about the 5-year requirement and 5-year supply situation. So I think we'll talk about that then. I mean, we've talked about it, and I'll come to a view about it. But we can have a final discussion about the merits of that and the potential confusion that could cause in terms of 5-year requirement and supply. But thank you for clarifying that position. Just one other thing that I've noticed when I was rereading policy H1, irrespective of whether it's modified or not, the second paragraph. I mean, it's not really a policy. Well, it may be a policy, I don't know. But anyway, it basically states that the minimum requirement will be met through completion since April 2016, sites with planning permission, commitments, and housing land allocations and mixed use allocations set out in our policy H2, which, yes, I can see that's factually correct. But what that doesn't refer to is planning permissions that may come forward on unallocated sites during the plan period, which would make a contribution to supply. So as a statement of fact, it doesn't seem quite right. I'm not sure it's a policy anyway. Can I just leave that with you to think about, actually?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I mean, there's another, we'll talk about later about whether the reason justification needs to a bit more explicitly set out what the supply is and how it's made up, and that might be just something that you do with in that respect. Just to look at the numbers there, if I could. We've obviously in the plan, I think that the supply identified is a total of 11,545. Is that right? But I think is it Fiona McCall I'm talking
Sorry,
to
so
now?
yeah, I can talk through that through the paper with you. Yes. So the total supply is in that first table there.
Sorry, just before we get the plan is submitted, I just wanted to go back. So that only has the information based on the April 2020 date. So it's got completions up to then, and it's got the commitments and allocations from then. And I think, and it's got a small site allowance within it. Well, in the trajectory at the back of the plan anyway, but not actually in the justification. And that's correct. 400 for the small sites, yeah?
Yes, that would be it with that base date of April 2020, yeah.
Yeah, and that gives the total of 11,545, I think.
Right, okay, sorry, I don't have that figure.
Okay, don't worry about that now.
Sorry.
If you can note it, and maybe if it's, I'm pretty sure that's correct, but if it's not, you can clarify. But anyway, let's move on to the revised position. As you said in your the document that you produced yesterday, it gives a figure now of 11,579. Is that correct? Correct.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's made up of the completions, the commitments, the allocations, and the small sites. We've got separate figures and a breakdown for each of those in the tables there. So that's clear. Okay, right. So thank you for that. As I said, we're going to talk about all the components of supply throughout today, both the allocations and the assumptions made about commitments, etc. this afternoon. So we'll come on to that. So just to be clear, though, are you proposing that the plan be updated to roll forward the supply information to April 2021 rather than April 2020. Is that the council's?
Yes, that's what we
what
we were intending to do. Yes, to give a more up to date position. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Okay. And what does this latest supply situation tell us has changed in the last year? Does it suggest that the supply ones, the bottom line figure is pretty much the same, actually, isn't it? But
yes,
is it confirming that the trajectory that was in the submitted plan is correct, not changed radically, or what?
Yes, I think there hasn't been sort of significant changes to the trajectory following the update. It's been simply updating sites in terms of the monitoring of completions that have been done over the last financial year, and a lot of those completion figures were quite close to our actual estimates for the proposed submission plan. So yeah, I don't think there hasn't really been significant changes in the trajectory. There has been a number of sites completed, so they have been removed, but yes, there's not sort of significant changes to the trajectory. There's been a few alterations in terms of estimates on a couple of the strategic sites where a bit more information's come to light. So again, not significant or substantial, we consider.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of I haven't come to a definite conclusion yet, but obviously the plan, as I said, H1 sets out a minimum target of 8,440, and the council's target of trying to achieve 9,800 sorry, I've lost the figure again now. 9,840. Yeah. So I suppose the question there is, well, why then have we got 11,500 allocate? Supply. It's nearly, it's 1,700 or so more. What's the rationale for that?
I think it brings some flexibility to the plan. Obviously, there's nothing in guidance or the NPPF to say you have to have a land supply buffer in your local plan, but that there is sort of advice from other house building sectors to suggest that it helps with flexibility. If some sites don't deliver, having that buffer gives you some comfort in the plan process that there are other sites that will come forward. So that buffer just gives that added flexibility.
Okay, thank you. Right. Let's move on then. Well, no, sorry, we won't move on. Has anyone got any questions generally about that overall supply, those figures and the overall supply situation? I don't want to go back over the requirement again. We've had the discussion about that and what that's based on and the evidence for it, how it links to job growth and the demographic component and the national projections, etc., etc. So I'm not going back over all that again. But any questions or comments about the housing supply in general and the total figure of 11,500 that anyone wishes to make before I move on to next agenda item? No? Okay. Right. So next one, I should deal with this quite quickly, I think, is the plan distinguishes between strategic and non-strategic housing allocations, and the council's response to PQ25 proposed a main modification to make that explicit. Within policy H2, it was there in the sense that the table, I think, yes, some of them had the list in table 6.3 had strategic listed in brackets for some, not others. I suppose the question is, what's the purpose of distinguishing between strategic and non-strategic housing allocations? And if policy H1 itself is a strategic policy, which the council say it is, how can some of the proposals in it be non-strategic? Someone from the council want to address that?
Hi, sir.
Mr. Nelson.
I'll come in on that one.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, microphone was up in the air. Yeah, sorry. I mean, it was really an attempt. I think it was something that came from our sort of HELAR methodology process early that almost identified a parameter of, I think it was around about sites of around 500 dwellings or more that we classed as strategic. But it's a fair point, to be honest, that I know certain plans argue all allocations are strategic and therefore, yeah, should be identified as such. So I think we'd just be open to suggestions on that, really, if it does make things clearer to just make all the allocations strategic ones in the plan.
Well, as I say, at the moment it causes me a bit of confusion because H1 is described as a strategic policy.
Yeah.
So it's a bit hard to see how bits of it are not strategic and
not strategic. Yeah. I understand that. It was purely based on the size, the relative size of them.
And there's no policy difference, is there? There's no implementation implication or anything. There's no different policy in the plan that relates to strategic and non-strategic, other than say H10 and H11, which are separate policies for those strategic sites.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So one way would just be to just delete for individual sites. Just delete reference to whether they're
delete the reference. Yeah.
Just leave policy H2 as one of the policies that is a strategic policy. I think. I mean, we discussed this in week one. The significance of things being strategic or not strategic is in neighbourhood plans that may come along and the general conformity test. Yeah. So there could potentially be some implications if you describe some allocations as being strategic or not strategic. Whereas if policy H2 is a strategic policy, it's clear then that neighbourhood plans would have to be in general conformity with that in terms of the overall, the housing supply situation and contributing to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well.
We'd be happy to look into the potential implications of making that change on any neighbourhood plan areas for you.
Well, I don't think it necessarily needs to say anything about the neighbourhood plan areas. It's just removing the references in policy H2 to the individual sites as being strategic or elsewhere in the plan. I mean, it may be that you want H10 and H11, which are separate policies, to be strategic policies. I think they are classified as that, and therefore there's no harm in those policies as calling them strategic allocations, I don't suppose, because there doesn't appear to be any contradiction or confusion about that. I'll leave it with you just to think about then, if we could.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Mr. Baker?
Thank you, sir. I mean, obviously, we made representations in respect of the. We don't think the proposed modification was necessary. We thought it was slightly unclear in terms of its purpose. We thought the council actually had sort of misinterpreted what strategic meant. I think they were just pointing to purely about the size of the particular allocations, whereas I think Section 19 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, when it discusses strategic policies, actually states that it's about what are the strategic priorities for an area, and we think that some of the sites which were identified as non-strategic, in particular Maxgate Farm, they are actually important for the strategic goals of the plan as a whole. So in our view, we'd concur with the general summary of the discussion that we don't think it's necessary, and I think we'd support that modification being removed.
I suppose that's a very good example, actually, Mr. Baker, because if the Middleton St George neighbourhood plan were to come along and designate the housing allocation that's not a strategic allocation as local green space, for example, the council may not be able to argue that it was it had to be in general conformity with the local plan, and therefore, that could take precedence.
I mean, I don't think it's for this examination to discuss various hypothetical situations in respect of that. But I think one thing of note is that the overall housing requirement for Middleton St George, as set out in the local plan, is a strategic policy. So that number set out in policy H1, I understand, and in the tables that support it, is still a strategic policy, so that growth would still need to be found. And of course, this site, Maxgate Farm, has been identified as the most strategic site and the most sustainable site, rather out of the collection that were considered right across all the service villages.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about Maxgate Farm. We've talked
Of
about
course,
strategy, we've
yeah.
talked about service villages. Right, Councillor Gilson.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to come in that there's no justification for considering Middleton St George as a strategic area or whatever it is within the plan. You know, if it isn't already in the plan, how can you designate it as such now? Really, and you know, there are too many issues and disputes within about housing allocations within Middleton St George. So I would dispute that.
Okay, thank you. As I say, we're going to talk about the allocations in Middleton St George in due course. So, any other comments or points about the issue of strategic and non-strategic housing allocations and the way the plan presents those? No. Okay, thank you. Right, let's move on then to the first of the individual allocations that we're going to talk about, which is Elm Tree Farm. This is shown within, I think, the master plan area for Skirningham on figure it is in the plan, the indicative master plan, but it's not part of policy H10. I think is clear, and it's its own separate allocation. That's correct, is it, Council?
Yes, so that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So H10, there's no requirement for this site to be within the comprehensive master plan or anything like that.
It's within the master plan framework area, but has its own separate allocation.
Well, do any parts of the policy H10 apply to Elm Tree Farm?
I don't think specifically, but if any colleagues want to correct me on that. But there is an allocation statement for Elm Tree Farm, site 392, and it references back to the master plan framework area, basically ensuring that it doesn't conflict with that or prohibit any of the criteria and requirements with that. I think it's simply due to its clear proximity to the Skirningham allocation. It was felt it made sense to have that in the allocation statement and have it within the master plan framework area.
So looking at the developer requirements, part F, development should be in broad alignment with the master plan framework and the development principles contained in H10.
We've also encouraged developers of that site to engage with the master plan process, but historically that site has come forward through the planning process at a quicker rate, and they decided not to engage with that master planning work. But as I say, simply because it's proximity to the Skirningham allocation and sort of the wider area, it made sense to tie them into that the master planning framework area. And I think it's important to note that the promoters of that site consider that they're not actually inhibiting the master plan framework area at all, and there's no issues with it's actually a current planning application at the moment. No issues conflicting with that.
So would it physically connect into other parts of the Skirningham allocation development?
It would be.
Vehicular access is independent, isn't it? It comes from one of the existing roads.
Yeah, it's independent access. There would, I think we maybe need to get some input from our colleague in development management, if that's okay, Dave Coates. I believe that the application scheme is its own entity. There's no kind of vehicular routes from Elm Tree Farm into the Skirningham allocation, but I would imagine there'd be linkages in terms of walking and cycle routes and that type of thing. I don't think there'd be any it's its own entirety, but there'd be potentially those types of linkages. I'm not sure that Mr. Coates could help a little bit further with that point.
Yeah, so that's good, Mr. Coates. I know we've got Mr. Hall for Bellway here as well, so we can deal with this. I'm not too concerned about the planning application, but what I just want to understand what the plan is saying. Do you want to advise Mr. Coates on?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, sir. I just to reconfirm really what Fiona McCall said. There isn't any physical attachment to the greater scheme, as it were, but there is a separate vehicular access from Sparrow Hall Drive. So that is an entity in itself. So that there isn't any physical attachment, but from my memory, I'd have to pull up the plan. I'm not so sure there's any other linkages, pedestrian linkages through either, sir. So it is a site which is effectively freestanding.
Okay. And now, from your development management point of view, and using the plan, you read the development, presumably you read the development requirements when you get a planning application in, and you look to see whether it's complying with those or not.
Yeah.
What does it help you to have point F, which says development should be in broad alignment with the Skirningham Master Plan framework and the development principles contained in policy H10? Do you know what that means?
I think as far as I'm concerned, sir, I'd consider this to be a separate site and can be developed separately, and that's something that's been followed by the developers, and that's why we have a detailed application we have had for some time now, which could be judged quite separately, in my opinion. So
that clause F doesn't really serve any purpose to you?
Not from a development management perspective, so no.
No, thank you very much. That's helpful. Right. Just, I don't know if this is probably back to Fiona McCall. Just to check on the delivery, the site's allocated for 150 or indicative yield of 150, and it's expected that it will start with 30 dwellings in 2022-23 and contribute a total of 120 to the 5-year supply. And the evidence for that is set out in the Appendix 1 to your Matter 4 statement, and it's to do with Bellway's legal interest in the progress, which seems to have been made, even it's continued since you wrote that. Yes. In terms of the contribution to the 5-year supply, you're still confident that will take place, yeah?
Yes, that's correct, sir. Yes. So the developer for that scheme, Bellway, have confirmed that they agree with our estimates on the site and confirm our delivery estimates within that 5-year period. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Bellway makes some suggestions or requests about Appendix B and the development requirements relating to the retention of the older farm buildings, which is part B. The protecting and accommodating Green Lane, which I got a bit confused about. Bellway say it's outside the site. Appendix B says Green Lane is adjacent to the site. Perhaps you could clarify that. The historic track Green Lane runs adjacent to the site. And then thirdly, about the reference to the site being within an area of high landscape sensitivity. The Bellway say that the council's evidence doesn't show that. Could you respond to each of those?
Yes, of course, sir. In terms of the older farm buildings, it was just simply a requirement in the statement, which I think it does say where possible to retain those buildings. It's basically just a good planning practice and principle to try and retain and reuse older buildings where possible. So it's not there is flexibility within that requirement. In terms of the Green Lane historic track, it runs sort of in a southerly direction. It runs east to west to the southern part of the site, and then we believe it runs north through the middle of the site as well. So again, it's just flagging up potential issues and constraints in the site. I think was there it was the landscape sensitivity points. We did recognise that. In the allocation statement, we've referenced it. I think we've referenced it to being, is it?
It says the site is in an area of high landscape sensitivity.
Yes, yeah. That originally came from an initial essay assessment, an initial assessment of the site, but since then the housing landscape sensitivity study was undertaken, where it assessed the site as having a lower level of landscape sensitivity. So yeah, we acknowledge that hasn't been reflected through to that allocation statement, and we'd be happy to update that and modify it appropriately.
Okay, so that's yes. Okay, and why does Part C say the Green Lane Historic Tract runs adjacent to the site, and then it goes on to say this should be protected and accommodated in an appropriate site layout? So I think you've just described that. Did you say that the Green Lane runs along the southern boundary of the site and then runs north south through the site, the middle of the site?
Yes, I think so, sir. Yeah, I understand it sounds confusing. It might be best if we clarify that point and or suggest a modification for that criteria, just to clear that up. Yes, it's not clear.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Right. I mean, the other points that others have made are about the sites. I mean, this is some of the people that were here yesterday talking about Skirningham, and I think some of the people are not here who were going to talk about Elm Tree Farm. But I think the points that they were making was one of them was about it being remote from the town centre, existing bus stops. Do you want to just respond to that?
I think so. Yes, there's arguments and challenges about it being remote, but it is a site which is in close, but adjacent to the existing main urban area, and sort of services such as bus stops and existing facilities. So yeah, I don't think it's would agree with that thought. Okay. on the site. It's adjacent to the main urban area, next to existing facilities and services, and it's not that we want to detract from the town centre, and I think it's the Skirningham allocation as well, although a separate site will also have its own services and facilities once that critical mass is generated through that scheme. So there will be new facilities coming through the plan period as well, and adjacent to it. So no, sorry, sir, I don't think I agree with those arguments. Yes.
There was some representations talking about the impact on Springfield Park, and I think this goes back to the changes to the allocation that were made during the preparation of the plan. Is that right? I think originally there was a version that was going to have access through the park. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, sir. That was removed from the plan due to a decision by members to remove that access. Yes.
Yeah. So at the moment, now the access is through the adjoining residential area to the east. Is that right? Or the south?
South, yeah, off Sparrow Hall Drive. Yeah, I'm not sure whether my colleague Andy Casey's he got his hand raised to make some highways points on that.
Yeah, but anyway, no impact on Springfield Park. That's not part of the proposal now at all.
No, that's not.
No. Okay, thank you. Right. Sorry. So we've got. Did Mr. Coates wish to say something, or was Mr. Casey from the council?
It's Mr. Casey, I think so.
Yeah. Good morning again, sir.
Morning.
Yeah, it was just really to clarify because it was specifically mentioned about walking distances to the nearest bus stop.
Yeah.
So I'll just refer you to the topic paper on transport, and that really is a sifting process associated with the SA to identify those locations that are most sustainable. The site is actually within 400 metres walking distance of two existing bus routes, one which is the X67 half-hourly service along Salters Lane to the south, the A1150, Winfield Road, sorry, to the south, the A1150, and it's also within 400 metres walking distance of Winbush Way, which has I think it's 4 buses an hour now, 5 buses an hour, free car service, so it's reasonably well served by that. It wouldn't actually meet, we've got which we'll obviously talk about next week about the policy, the 400 metre walking distance of 80% of the site. It doesn't actually meet that, but it's not a million miles off. And the idea was really that there would be a service going through Skirningham, which is obviously immediately adjacent to it, and that'll serve the northern end of the site. You'll probably recall from the discussions yesterday, talk about that loop road coming down, and the idea was that there would be access through this site for sustainable transport purposes, and that would link on to the provision within Skirningham.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to reiterate as well, so sorry, just to reiterate as well, you know, it is close to a range of services, including supermarket, secondary school, primary school. So that's all, yeah.
Yeah. You said that it's within 400, well, part of the site is within 400 metres of two, I think you said 2 bus routes. Did you mean 2 bus stops?
Well, I specifically said routes because that's what the original screening. So if you got the topic paper, it'll talk about routes. The policy talks about stops. So it is within. So that's why I clarified really that the requirement for the screening process that the topic paper refers to is 400 metres of a route. It is within. It is within both of them. A section, but the southern sections of the site are also within 400 metres of the nearest bus stop on Wimbush Way, and the one that is on opposite the Springfield Hotel on the A1150. But there is a section to the north of that there isn't, and that's the section that will need to be linked up with sustainable transport links to the bus provision within Skirningham. Okay, thank you very much. That's clear. Right. I don't have any other questions to the council, I don't think. We've got some other hands up. I've got Councillor Gilson and Stephen Longstaff. Is that Councillor Gilson? Is that left over from before?
Apologies, yes, sorry.
Okay. And Stephen Longstaff. Sorry, I think you're here representing the for Bellway on this one, aren't you?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Just on this one, obviously, Mr. Hall's representing on the other ones.
Yeah, sure.
I'd just like to pick up on some of those points that have just been made, really.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I think, in terms of what Mr. Casey's just said in relation to the sustainability of the site, obviously very clear that it's within a range of services and a range of bus stops. It's very well related to the assistant settlement, so I won't dwell too much on that. I think that's fairly clear. It was more, obviously, we fully support the identification of the site. It was more picking up on those points that we've raised in relation to the development requirements, which you've already picked up on. I think, obviously, sort of the first one that we sort of raised an issue with was the yield of the site. So we've got a live pending planning application for 163 dwellings, which has no outstanding technical issues as far as we're aware. We're just waiting for the council to move those sites forward and determine them. So firstly, I think we would ask if the yield of the site could be amended just to be in line with the pending planning application. Secondly, so we've talked about the older farm buildings. I think we've set out very clearly in our hearing statement as to why we don't think that's necessary. I'll sort of leave you to make a judgment on that, sir.
Yeah, sure.
It isn't within the scheme. It's never been discussed as part of the scheme. The application was submitted in 2018. It's been through a couple of iterations of changes. Again, said it's never been picked up. It's not been raised by Historic England, the council's conservation officer. It's not mentioned in the evidence base anywhere. It doesn't really seem like it's necessary to make the policy sound, in my opinion. The point on the historic track, this seemed to was clarified in the council's response to the regulation 18 representations, and the reference seemed to clarify that it was the track to the southwest of the site, so the bit that's outside and not the bit that runs through the centre of the site as being the bit that's of historic interest. And that is picked up on the proposals map. If you look at the updated proposals map, I think it is a pink dashed line.
Yeah. We'll just look at the.
Yeah, it's marked as historic routes on the key. So.
Yeah. Okay, so the track that goes through it to the farm, that's from your point of view, that's not the green lane that needs to be.
It doesn't appear to be, sir, based on the council's evidence. That track actually serves the golf course to the north.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Okay, well, the council said it would clarify that. So in terms of looking at the modification on that, so yeah, the other one was about landscape sensitivity.
Yeah, again, I think we've sort of come to a conclusion that doesn't need to be there, or was a modification to that, which obviously we would review and provide comments on that.
Yeah.
Again, I think the other point to make is it will be surrounded by a housing allocation as well, a very large housing allocation. And in terms of the points about Skirningham, yes, we progressed this planning application independently of that. And we're very clear from the start that we didn't think it needed to come forward comprehensively. This was a smaller independent site that could come forward in the short term, but that wouldn't prejudice the delivery of Skirningham or any of the aims of Skirningham. So Bellway would support the removal of Part F from the issues and requirements on the basis of what's already been discussed, really. We think it's ready to go now, and that's certainly the discussions we've had with officers at the council, that it can be granted consent in the short term, and that will allow early delivery. And we've already touched on the fact that it's within the 5-year supply, and we've talked about the trajectory, which again we've supported the council's position on that. But we're very keen to get on site and get started. It's been in the system for a long time.
Just to clarify your position on the 5-year supply, then the 120 within by 2026.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. And that's based on 30 dwellings a year over 4 years. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. Okay. Any other comments, questions that people have about Elm Tree Farm? If I think there's some, just to clarify, what I'm asking the council to do is reconsider whether there needs to be any references to the Skirningham master plan area in the introductory paragraph to the development requirements and clause F. Whether the part B is justified regarding older farm buildings. Part C, the green lane, clarifying and being consistent with what's now shown on the policies map in terms of historic routes and what the requirement is for any track that does run through the site, whether it's historic or not. Presumably, I don't know. And part D, landscape sensitivity, whether that just needs to be deleted or amended to reflect the council's evidence about what the sensitivity is. Okay, I think that deals with that. So we'll move on to the next allocation, if we could, please, which is Blackwell Grange. Blackwell Grange East, I think, to give it its correct title. So this is subject to some changes, both to the policies map and to the wording of the development requirements. The submitted policies map included the site within the local wildlife site. And the change to the policy map suggested by the council deletes that. The council's also proposed a modification to Appendix B with the aim of ensuring the plan is sound with regard to design. And then the statement of common ground between the council and the Historic England, published on the 9th of April, includes suggestions from Historic England about further modification to protect the heritage assets. And then the council's looked at that, and I think it's come to a slightly revised wording, but broad agreement on that. So can I just clarify a number of things, if I could, with the council? Mr. Casey, your camera's on. I don't know if you wish to turn it off because you're the only one. No, it's okay. Fine, thank you. Right, I don't know who I'll be addressing these initial comments to about this allocation and the designations. Mr. Nelson. Right, so delete the local wildlife site notation on the housing allocation, but you'd retain it on the land to the north up to and around the hotel. Is that right?
That's what we've suggested. Yes. Yeah. However, I mean, on the local wildlife site, the principal reason that it was originally designated was around newt a newt pond, which is on site 10, if you refer to your policies map there. Now, I mean, obviously that's a site that's under construction now. The newt issue and mitigation was considered at the time. So I mean, that was the primary reason. So yeah, I mean, whether that wildlife site could do with re-surveying potentially now is you know, something that's up for discussion, I suspect.
Right, I'm not sure where that leaves us, but I'll think about that. Yeah. Right. So now, just to clarify, it's a bit difficult to see with the overlapping layers, and I've got a paper copy. It may be easier if I looked at it online or you looked at the different layers. But can we just clarify what the allocation is got in addition to housing allocation on it? I think it's now within the. Is it within the urban and rural parklands?
It is, yes. That's the solid red line that's around the right. Site now. But yeah, I mean that's something we've acknowledged throughout the process, almost going back as far as 2013 when the two golf courses merged. That, yeah, you know, that was part of the parkland, and it's very much part of what we're wanting to achieve through providing development here to open up that parkland area for public access.
Right, so it's within the parkland. The policies map also seems to show the allocation, or most of the allocation, as part of the green wedge. Is that right?
It is, yes, correct. I mean, the green wedge policy would not necessarily preclude, you know, areas of development, and I think we've reflected that in our modifications as well through discussion with Historic England, that, you know, the schemes can be accommodated within green wedges with additional enhancement of there's a lot of existing mature planting around the edge of that site which we seek to maintain and also, you know, enhance. I think particularly Historic England were keen along the northern boundary to enhance that planting.
Right, so ENV3 relates to green wedges.
Yeah.
And it says that the basic point of a green wedge seems to be to retain the openness and the green infrastructure function of the green wedge. It seems hard to, I mean, I know that relates to the whole of the green wedge, which is a much bigger area.
Yeah.
So you'd say, well, you can build on, this is still part of it. So the implications of that are for the design and the landscaping and the layout of the development, so that it would still have the character and appearance of part of the green wedge. Is that the idea?
Yeah. I mean, it's looking at a fairly low density development, and I think some of Historic England's comments reflected that as well. That almost, you know, they weren't wanting very tall properties in there. But as I say, I think the key element for that is the tree lined approaches into Darlington there, which we'd very much seek to maintain. So down Carmel Road South and in past the other part of Blackwell Meadows as well.
Okay, so you've got a rather complicated, well, I say it's complicated, you've got a multi number of policies. You've got policy ENV3C applying to the parkland, and you've got policy ENV3 Part A relating to the green wedge, and then you've got the development requirements in Appendix B, which kind of flesh out that. Okay, right, understood. Yeah, so your statement, going back to the local wildlife site, your statement said that yes, you would, the development requirements would need to be amended to delete reference to it being part of a local wildlife site, but it could refer to containing a biodiversity habitat and require habitat improvements on the parkland area to the north.
Yeah.
So is it correct that it contains a biodiversity habitat, or are you saying that actually you don't know that now?
I'm sure as all areas like that will. I mean, obviously the golf course moved out, I think it was 2013. So yeah, it's been left relatively, sort of to its own devices since then. So I'm sure, I wouldn't like to say that there's not things within there that would need to be dealt with. But I mean, they'd also be covered under the other requirements of our environmental policies, and also potentially any national policies too. And obviously we've got the requirement for biodiversity net gain in there as well. So I think really it's something that almost through the application process would need an up-to-date survey undertaking to see exactly what's there now. So
okay, so at the moment you haven't got formally proposed a modification to it was part C, it's part D I think now, of the development requirements. I think it still refers to the site being designated as a local wildlife site, is that right? Saying that, or has there been a further mod?
The only mod would leave the remaining part of the site to the north, sort of between site 403 and Blackwell Grange Hotel. So.
Sorry, there is a further mod.
There is a further mod, is there? Yeah, sorry, I was getting pointed to one as well.
Okay, right, I've got that. Right, let's have a look at the historic England suggestion and your slight tweak to it. I can see what that is. Do you want to just explain why you felt that you changed Part A to state that the proposal should be informed by the recommendations of the Heritage Impact Assessment? Yeah.
I mean, obviously the Heritage Impact Assessment is a piece of work that we got done recently to inform the plan submission. We acknowledge it's a sensitive site. It's sensitive for open space. It's sensitive for impact on listed buildings. We very much have now we altered the original proposal that we had. It was originally Site 9 in our draft plan. Now, I think that probably was much more controversial and raised a lot more issues. And a number of people quite rightly pointed out that our statement of significance indicated that the southern area of the site was the more suitable for development and didn't impact upon what was the historic parkland setting. So we took those comments on board, and that's why we've come up with this, different proposal, if you like. So sorry, with that, obviously we want to make sure that the design and the standards of this development are as high as we possibly can. Obviously the council is the landowner for this site, and that will be, any requirements will be set out in our terms of sale, if you like, for that site. So really the reason we wanted to take on those HIA points, and also the input we'd had from Historic England, was just to really follow the absolute best advice we've got on ensuring that high standard of development and design for this proposal.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll get Historic England's confirmation that they're happy with it or not in a moment. Just finally, though, in terms of the trajectory, you're suggesting that 15 dwellings were built in 23-24, and each year after, it will contribute to 45 by 2026. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Obviously, you've seen the representations from Mr. Green about the interest, the considerable interest there, and you've alluded, I think, to those and the way the council's adapted the proposals as the plan's been prepared, changing one allocation to another, which I know the representative for the Blackwell Grange Hotel has got something to say about that as well. So we'll hear from those in a minute. But anything further you wish to say in anticipation of what they may say, or in response to the things that I've raised?
Not at the moment, sir, but
okay.
If there's anything you need to come back to me on that.
Sure. Okay, right, Historic England. Mr. Cumbers, do you want to just a quick word on this? Are you happy with the
thank you,
way
sir.
the modification is shaped up now?
We're able to confirm that as a result of the suggested modifications, we are content with this allocation going forward. The land that is proposed was not part of the originally designed parkland lying south of where the boundary is to the north. That is essentially where that differential occurs. So whilst it's part of the setting, it's the least sensitive part of the overall parkland as is now, and we're content.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And obviously, I've seen there's SD65, which sets out the statement of significance, and there's the various bits of information that go with that. So I've got that. So thank you for that confirmation. Right. Let's get comments from others then. Mr. Green.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to pick up, sir, on the point of the green wedge.
Yeah.
And the green wedge on 403, and also on the parkland above.
Yeah.
It's difficult to understand why the green wedge has to stop where it stopped, and why it doesn't continue to the boundary of the parkland, of the urban parkland, the red boundary that's marked on the policies map, and why the authority haven't taken that right to the boundary. And it's also interesting to note that Mr. Nelson referred to what was Site 9, which was Site 009, which was the original plan that the authority actually put forward with housing around the northern boundary of the parkland. That Site 009 is exactly the same shape and size as the missing green wedge. And there is a level of suspicion there that if we're protecting this parkland, and if it is an urban parkland, and if we're successful with the submission that we've made for a local green space, which I know, sir, is something that is part of M10 next week, there is this suspicion that perhaps in the future, if this is not protected, this parkland must be protected and mitigated against further development. If the green wedge doesn't go up to that boundary, the red boundary, then there is a suspicion that we can go ahead with some future building. And we talk about mitigation. Mitigation is mentioned in the heritage impact assessment. It's also mentioned in the statement of common ground between English heritage and between English heritage and the authority. If we're not mitigating with a very cast iron mitigation, either as a local green space or as a field in trust, then allowing Site 403 to be developed would just be the thin end of the wedge. There is a feeling throughout the community and throughout the borough that we would simply lose the parkland completely. So I would like you to take note of that, sir. Mr. Nelson did refer to why the Site 403 was a wildlife site and why it had been removed. And he did mention the pond. The ponds that he was referring to were actually on Site 10, Site 010. And that now has been removed. That was a wildlife site. And the statement the authority have made is that has been removed as a wildlife site. There is no way, sir, that could have remained a wildlife site, because that's the site where 200 trees were felled in 2018 and where 2 ponds were damaged. And I think, sir, if you've seen our report and our movies, you'll see what actually happened to those meadows. I suggest, sir, that an ecological survey is carried out on the remaining parkland, because north of Site 403 there is a pond as well, and that certainly has got wildlife and surely would be habitat for great crested newts. I'd also, sir, like to draw your attention to the heritage impact assessment, which is a very sound assessment. The section that deals with the main parkland and mitigation, protection and development that the authority would like to do in terms of a naturalistic parkland is very sound. What is hugely inaccurate, sir, is the opening paragraph on page 12 of that heritage impact assessment. And it's misleading, and it's a shame, because this is a document which is part of the library. It's document SD 29.
Yeah.
And it's just hugely inaccurate. And it actually states that Blackwell Grange, the actual building, is sitting on a disused golf course. Well, the golf course, as Mr. Nelson indicated earlier, moved in 2013. And we sent a communication to the authority earlier about this, with the ambiguities and with the corrections. And so I would like to move today that we actually add those corrections and remove that ambiguity, because Blackwell Grange does not sit on a golf course. Blackwell Grange sits on a beautiful historic parkland.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
I'd also like to mention the wildlife site. Again, perhaps this is something that we should be looking at in Matters 10 next week. But the wildlife site that extends to the back of Blackwell Grange, which is the former orchard, to simply say, sir, that in 2010 there was a survey carried out by the authority. We can't find that now, but the ecologist has moved on, and that was indicating that that was a habitat for bat, as well as other flora and fauna. And I think what Mr. Nelson said, we would agree with, that the whole area would really benefit from a very serious ecological survey. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to, before I bring in Helen Hewitt, I just want to ask the council to clarify a couple of things that, following on from what Mr. Green's said there. Going back to the Green Wedge, Mr. Nelson, first of all, on the housing allocation itself, 403, why is the little part of it in the northwest corner excluded from the Green Wedge? Is there a physical?
Yeah, I mean, the Green Wedges were assessed, a long time ago, and certainly before, Site 403 was developed. And actually, I was just wanting to come back on Mr. Green's point that Site 9, almost omits the Green Wedge, but actually there was some in there.
Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson, a minute. Can you just answer my question? Why is part of 403 appears to be excluded from the Green Wedge? What's the physical reason for that?
I assume it seems to have been providing a buffer from the built development. From the look of things, seems to be the
buffer.
The link
Green
there.
Wedge.
I don't know. Yeah,
Isn't the purpose of the Green Wedge to be a buffer of openness?
No, it isn't. It isn't. Yeah, I'm not sure why there's that little corner there, but they are historic areas that we've had in there. So,
well, that needs clarifying, please. Now, in terms of the Green Wedge going outside the site, which isn't really what I'm concerned about today, but do you want to just, again, why doesn't the Green Wedge, what does it follow in there in terms of landscape? Why doesn't it just go up to the edge of the parkland with the red line, as Mr. Green said, all the way around the parkland?
Yeah, I mean, I can only assume the assessment at the time was looking at just key views and things like that, and whether there's something in the topography there that means that area goes beyond the field of view. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's something we're happy to look into for you.
Right. Okay, well, I'll make a note of that. Right, okay, let's bring Helen Hewitt in and get her perspective on this. As I said, you're treading a tricky line because I'm not dealing with emission sites. So you tell me why this allocation is or is not sound.
Yeah, I'll be very careful not to discuss anything that way. Obviously, you've read the our written statement, which outlines what our proposals would be in any case. So I would just like to again reiterate our concerns that I raised yesterday with regard to the methodology of selecting 403 as a site. I won't dwell on that too much, and obviously I'm aware of Historic England's comments. So really just to raise the concern that I think has already been raised about the biodiversity issue in terms of the local wildlife site. We would consider that there's no evidence that's unjustified in terms of being allocated by mistake or as an error. We would also just wonder if the council could clarify why 403 is no longer identified as parkland where it previously was. I appreciate the comments just then with regard to the green wedge, but it would appear to us that allocation of 403 for development is contrary to EMV3, which has previously been mentioned. In terms of impacting on openness, I appreciate what comments have just been made, but that's something that we would like to highlight. I am conscious that I don't want to discuss any emissions or seem to bring that up, but if there was alternative sites where development could be directed again away from the green wedge, that should obviously be considered. I would also, and really importantly on behalf of my client, like to suggest that no evidence has been provided that the economic impact of development of Site 403 has been considered. As you'll be aware, Blackwell Grange is an operational hotel in a Grade 2 listed building, and ultimately, the approach is very important, and how it operates as a hotel in terms of the setting. It operates weddings, and that development on that site of 403 would impact on its desirability, and being a listed building, that might impact on its ability to operate, and the retention of it as a going concern in the future might be impacted in terms of that development on that site.
Okay, in terms of obviously the council's described the sensitivity of the sites 403 and the sort of the various mitigations and requirements that relate to that in the Appendix B, and that's been modified, and that's and I suppose that's all about trying to retain and protect and enhance the setting of the listed building and the parkland. So you're saying that you don't think it would be effective in that regard?
Not when, no, basically not when there's alternatives available. I'm conscious I don't want to discuss emissions.
Yeah.
Like when there's alternatives in a less visually prominent location.
Yeah. Okay. So just in terms of visually prominent, this housing, where would the housing development be visually prominent from?
Well, it would be on the approach road.
You mean the driveway up to the hotel rather than the main road? Yeah.
Well, from the main road, and also once you come off the main road, from the roundabout, once you come off the front of the driveway, the setting of the listed building.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And the way that part relating to the wildlife site has been modified by the council. I don't know if you've got it before you, but it says now that the site, this is the housing allocation 403, contains biodiversity habitat, although Mr. Nelson said that probably needs checking, although Mr. Green says there's a pond and it probably does. So anyway, contains biodiversity habitat, and any development should provide mitigation. Habitat improvements required on the parkland area designated as local wildlife site to the north. So that's presumably your client's land.
Yeah.
Which you're disputing should be a local wildlife site. Would that be an effective policy? Would the landowner be accepting mitigation on that on the land?
No. If, like was discussed, the designation as a wildlife site was as a result of the newts and development of the site 10, which was on the opposite side of the roundabout. It's obviously closer to site 403 than it is to my client's site. So it wouldn't make sense to me as to why that would be allocated as a local wildlife site instead of land which is obviously closer to the original sort of source of the allocation.
So the hotel is the hotel privately owned?
The hotel is I believe it's council leased land. So it's on and the land that was the emission site was on the council's disposals list.
Yeah, okay. So the council do own the land that it's saying that the mitigation will be provided on?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, okay, right. Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Thank you. Anything further, Helen Huard?
Just to reiterate though that is leased by my client.
But would that restrict the ability of mitigation to be provided on in terms of this biodiversity mitigation?
I'm not sure of the details of the lease on that. I'm assuming the council will be able to clarify.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. To the council then, please.
Hi, sir. I've got a few points I can clarify if that would be useful for you, sir.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Just to confirm that the land around, including the area that is currently shown as wildlife site, yeah, that's in council ownership. So it is our land around there. Just in relation to the area that was omitted from site 403 from the green wedge, haven't had a look at it in the interval in between. I think I know what it is now, that there's actually a former, I think it was like the groundskeeper for the golf courses. There's like a building where they kept tractors and grass cutters and things like that. So there is actually some existing built development in that corner that's omitted there.
But it's only a small building, and it doesn't take up all of that.
Small building, yeah, but there's, I can only assume that's why there was some concession made there. But yeah, we can look into it, as we need to look into the wildlife site as well. Just in relation to the point Mr. Green said about the, and I mean, I know, you know, I've talked to Mr. Green a number of times there, that yeah, we still maintain that the most recent use of that site was as a golf course. You know, I mean, that's just,
I don't want to get bogged down in this.
Actually, correct. So
right.
yeah, okay.
Mr. Green said that the document says it's a disused golf course. I suppose, is that more accurate? It could be described as a former golf course, possibly. Yeah. It's not a disused golf course in the sense it's a golf course that may come back into use. Maybe that's the quibble. I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to hear any more about that. I understand the background. Thank you.
Just
your microphone's gone off.
Was it? Sorry. I think it was because my phone rang as well. Apologies for that. Yeah, the access arrangements. I mean, currently it doesn't have public access. It didn't have public access as a golf course. It still doesn't now. And I mean, obviously that's something that we're trying to bring forward as part of the parkland restoration. That would formalise those public access arrangements.
Okay. Right. Okay. Mr. Green's hand is up. Is that you've got something you wish to come back and comment on? Yes. Okay.
Simply 2 points.
Yeah, sure.
And I know that we're not dealing with emission sites, but we have seen the Blackwell Grange submission, which is requesting that site 009 replace site 403. And I think we need to reiterate that the reason that site 009 was removed, it was removed through the proper democratic process.
Yeah, understood, Mr. Green. Yeah, thank you.
Through cabinet, through council, and members of the community actually made their submissions, attended those meetings, and I have to say that in each of those meetings there was no representation made from Blackwell Grange. So we need to say that, and also that the heritage assessment and the statement of common ground with Historic England and the statement of significance all point to the protection of the parkland, which was going to be site 009. My other points, if I may, is again, it's referring to the statement of significance, which is SD 65.
Yeah.
In SD 65, on pages 16 to 20,
yeah,
the reference is made there to what's described as a dry fossilized stream bed. And the dry fossilized stream bed was in 2011, 2012. What we need to say is that through climate change over the last 9 years or so, the dry fossilized stream bed has actually come to life. And the pages 16 to 20 show that the former owner, the builder of Blackwell Grange in the 1790s, actually wanted to create a serpentine lake in that area because of the culvert and the water table there. What I need to say, sir, is that this year, had George Allen been with us, he would have been delighted because the serpentine lake appeared and it flooded the housing in Grange Side and the Spinney. The site 403 itself is described in history as being known as hamper car. And we all know that a car is a type of waterlogged wooden terrain. So what I'd be suggesting is that the authority seriously look at site 403, consider what was a dry fossilized stream bed, look at what happened this year and last year and the year before, and look at where that serpentine lake appeared naturally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, we're going to have a break in a minute, but Mr. Hall has got his hand raised. Mr. Hall?
Sorry, sir, that's up in error, actually.
Okay.
I realised that was up,
right.
Sorry.
Okay, right. I mean, just, okay. We're going to have a break now, and then we've got four more allocate. Well, we've got two Coniscliffe Park allocations, Maxgate and Great Burdon, to deal with after the break before lunch, so that should be fine. Before we do, so I think there's an action point here, which is clearly to consider the green wedge in this area. I mean, I'm looking at the other green wedges. I mean, I don't want to get into the details of how the boundaries are drawn, but they seem to be broadly filling up spaces that are open. I mean, there's some blurred areas, but there seems a bit of an anomaly here that to have this. And from what I've seen, I've got a map which has got quite a. I'm not going to do screen sharing, and I don't know what this came from, but I'm going to hold this up to the camera so they'll be able to recognise it. Can you see that? It's got all the sort of landscape features of the parkland. I think it may have been part of SD65 or the Heritage Impact Assessment. I can't remember which. It's one of those. It's a council document anyway. Anyway, just looking at that, and from what I've seen when I visited the site from the public road, and I have to confess I drove up to the hotel. I hope that was a public right of way. Anyway, there didn't seem to be any logic to where the green wedge stops within the allocation itself and within the area to the north. And looking at that sort of map and the landscape features there, I can't see any logic for why it would not. If you're going to have a green wedge designation on the undeveloped land, it shouldn't correspond with the parkland. But anyway, I'll just suggest that as something for the council to think about. I think by including the allocation within the green wedge, it kind of confuses things a little bit in terms of how the green wedge policy is intended to be applied. ENV3 seems to me quite clear that I know it's about the green wedge as an entity, but it seems a bit odd to have part of it being allocated to be built on. I mean, I don't really see why it would then retain its part of being part of the green wedge, especially when it's sort of physically separated by the road to the east or the southeast, and then the landscaping along the northern boundary, which is a requirement of the housing development. So the logic, this is for the council to think about and to come up and justify. The logic to me for the green wedge here would be for it to correspond to the parkland boundary outside the housing allocation, for the housing allocation to be excluded from the green wedge, but still have all the requirements of the Appendix B as modified to ensure that the quality and layout and landscaping, etc., of the development retains the setting of the listed building and the parkland. So I'll just leave that there as a bit of a steer as to as I think it might be the best way forward. But as I say, it's for the council to think about. Right, it's 11 o'clock. Good time to have a break. Any questions or any final points about that site? There's Helen Heward and Michael Green have both got their hands up. Are they left over, or are you wanting to come back? Helen Heward.
Apologies, I should have put that down. Sorry.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Right. I think then we'll have a break there. We'll resume at 11:15 if we could, please. Thank you. Don't exit the meeting. Just turn your microphone and camera off. Thanks. Okay, it's 11. But before I do, I just want to go back, if I could, if Mr. Longstaff still there? I think he is.
Yes.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. I just wanted to go back to a question I didn't ask you on Elm Tree Farm. I mentioned at the beginning today that I'd asked the council to produce a table of the housing allocations in the plan and designate for each which typology in the viability assessment they'd fall within and the value area. Elm Tree Farm, they say, is in the medium value area. You agree with that in terms of what the viability assessment identifies? Yeah.
Yep. So I've got no concerns on
Yeah.
viability.
Well, and it categorises it in the typology, which is a greenfield urban extension of 100. That's the typology it says would be most close to matching it. And for that, the revised table 10.6 in the CD08 shows it to be, well, orange, marginally viable, but it's the residual land value would be minus 10% of the benchmark land value according to the council's methodology. So could you just comment on that in terms of how viable you think the site is, and is it able to provide meet all of the requirements, the policy requirements for affordable housing, accessible homes, all those sort of things that are required by the plan?
Yes, sir. I haven't, to be honest, I haven't had a chance to have a good look through that additional evidence, but it's certainly not been raised to me by Bellway that there is any issues in terms of the viability of the site and meeting the policy requirements in the plan. No.
So the planning application, and maybe Mr. Coates, I might be putting him on the spot here, but in terms of the policy requirements in the plan, for example, the 20% affordable housing, the proportion of accessible and adaptable homes, biodiversity, net gain, those sort of things, as far as you're aware, Bellway would be addressing all of those through their application and complying with them. Is that right?
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Okay. I don't know. Is Mr. Coates, sorry, you may not completed this assessment, but is that broadly all right?
As you appreciate, sir, the application has been in for some time now, and it was deliberately paused, awaiting the outcome of the local plan, and that was the principal, well, the sole reason why it's been delayed. I'm satisfied that all the information that we currently have would enable us to proceed to a decision, subject to the outcome of the local plan.
Does it provide 20% affordable housing?
Yeah, let me double check something.
It does.
Yes. I'm just double checking to answer your specific question, sir. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I can confirm that.
And the requirement for accessible and adaptable homes, is that, presumably this is a task that you have these days in development management, is to check that?
It is, and that would be, it would form part of the consideration process. Yes.
Is it a full application or an outline?
It's a full application.
So you'd have that detail as part of this application, would you, for the accessible? I don't know how you check to see if homes are accessible and adaptable. Presumably there's a way. Shows how inexperienced I am at development management. But
there is a process we will go through, sir, to ensure that is taken into account. Yes.
Okay. So as far as you're concerned, there's no reasons for refusal based on policy requirements in the plan.
There's certainly no reason. I mean, clearly it would be a recommendation we would form, and it would go before members because of our delegated system. But on face value, sir, there's no reason why we can't proceed to that point. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Coates. So any further comments, Longstaff? So, Mr. Longstaff?
No, just to agree with what Mr. Coates has said.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, obviously, the local plan viability assessment is a typology-based approach. It makes generalised assumptions that are always going to vary from site to site. But obviously, the council evidence, as I've said earlier, does suggest on that approach that virtually all of the allocations are marginal rather than clearly viable. So I'm going to check with each one as far as I can with the site promoters their views about viability and the ability to meet policy requirements. And obviously we touched on that to do with Skirningham when we discussed it yesterday. We'll come back to it when we talk about Skirningham again on Thursday. So anyway, thank you both for that. I'll move on now to the next allocations, which are at Coniscliffe Park. What I call Coniscliffe Park North and South. Now, I don't want to get into the spatial strategy debate again about the rural areas and the approach to extensions to Darlington, etc. But what I do want to do is go through some issues associated with this particular allocation and it's the various impacts it would have and the justification for it. So. It's basically there's two allocations. Together they have capacity for just over 1,500, an indicative capacity for just over 1,500 dwellings, and there's assumptions about how many would be developed during the planned period. The two sites would be developed, one from Coniscliffe Road from the south with a new road access, and one would have an access from Staindrop Road on the northern boundary of the northern site, but they would connect up, and then this would form this road would then link through to other roads and ultimately form part of this improved orbital route around the urban area that we're going to talk about next week in terms of the rationale and the justification and the pros and cons of that. So the first question, I suppose, is why is this two allocations rather than one?
Hi, so I'll maybe take that question first.
Yeah.
I think it's basically the site is split in two because it's been promoted by two different parties, really. Taylor Wimpey, the southern element of the site, and the northern element from Gladman. It's come in as two separate planning applications, but the two promoters have been working together on sort of a master plan for the site, but that's essentially the reasoning for the two separate allocations.
Okay, and in terms of the relationship between them, I mean, one would start at the northern end and work south, and one would start at the southern end and work north, presumably. But ultimately, the main requirement in terms of coordinating the development would ultimately the roads would join up.
Yes, yeah. That's
and
correct,
obviously,
so, yeah.
Depending on the layout and design, there would be an interaction. I mean, it may be open space, it may be houses, but obviously the way they join together the two developments, it depends on the layouts and the etc. that each developer comes up with. But that's not a big issue, and there's no need for it to be a single allocation or any coordination for any other reason other than the joining up of the road.
Yes, that's correct, sir. Yes.
Yeah. So as I said the other day, I mean, you could have done it differently. You could have made it one allocation. You didn't. So it's not. I can't see it not being a reason for it being sound. So I just wanted to check that.
Okay.
Right. In terms of the relationship with the neighbourhood plan, obviously there's a made neighbourhood plan for the Low, Coniscliffe and Marybent, and obviously that doesn't include this allocation in it. It just includes it's just open countryside in the neighbourhood plan, I guess. So obviously it's a strategic plan that's come forward after the neighbourhood plan, and it supersedes it in effect to meet the requirements that the borough has for housing as the council sees it.
Yes, that's correct, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So insofar as interpreting the two plans together, once this plan has been adopted, it takes precedence because it's more recent than the neighbourhood plan, and then there's no ambiguity about the fact that these bits of land are allocated for development, notwithstanding what the neighbourhood plan says.
Yes, that's correct, sir. The legislation allows for the most recent part of the development plan to be the part to be considered by the decision maker, and that was kind of set out to the neighbourhood plan group during the process of the preparation of their neighbourhood plan, that we were proposing this larger site for allocation, and it was recognised in the examiner's report as well for the neighbourhood plan that that would be the situation if the local plan was adopted with that site within it.
Okay, in terms of you've got a landscape sensitivity assessment under the housing allocations. What does this one say about this?
I believe that those two sites come out as low visual and landscape sensitivity.
Okay. In terms of the physical and the visual relationship with the urban area, you've got quite a strong landscape feature, haven't you, of Baydale Beck and open land alongside it. So,
yes.
I don't know if it's described as an urban extension as not. Yes, it is. They're both described as urban extensions. They're not urban extensions in the sense that they kind of interlink with the urban areas to the east, are they?
Not directly. There is obviously that Beck Valley between the two.
Oh, that's quite a strong.
But they are, but yeah, they're still in close proximity to the main urban area. Yes.
Well, yeah, they're close, but they wouldn't ever be really read as, or would they? I don't know. I mean, would there be any connections through across the Beck?
As part of the allocation requirements, we ask for linkages between the existing main urban area and the proposed allocations to create linkages between the two.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So that's part. Yeah, sorry, I'm looking it up. Sorry, it took me a while. It's part I of the south site.
Yes.
And J for the north site. In practice, how many of those would there be, and where were they likely to be?
We haven't gone to that level of detail. To be honest, so it'd be something that we would look to look at through the detailed planning application process.
Okay, but there would still be, and then there's requirements relating to the buffering and protection of the Beck for both sites. Yeah. Yes, sir. There's the requirements within those statements about that protection and enhancement of the Beck. Yeah. Yes, and obviously the allocations would be covered by the environmental policies within the plan, sort of ENV7 and ENV8 about protection and enhancement, and also the green infrastructure policies as well. And then there's the flood zone too, alongside part of the Beck, so the development would be kept away from that. Yes, there's small parts of the eastern edge of the site are within flood zones 2 and 3, and it's clearly set out within the allocation statements that development should be directed away from those areas, but there is a proposed main modification just to make that even clearer, that no development will take place within those flood zone areas. Yeah, okay. So clearly the way these sites would be developed, as I say, would be the vehicular access would be from the Coniscliffe Road to the south and Staindrop Road to the north. There wouldn't be vehicular access across into the urban area. There may be, well, there's a requirement for at least one link for walkers and cyclists across the Beck from each site, but there would be quite a strong, and there's already quite a strong landscape feature that separates the land from the urban area, and that would be actually increased in the set. Well, not increased, but that would be retained with landscaping and openness along the eastern edge of the site. Yes, that's correct. So we think there's good opportunities to enhance that green infrastructure network on those two sites. Okay, well, okay, so it's a large, it's 1,500 houses, obviously in proximity to the urban area, obviously, but there would be sort of, well, I don't know, until you actually see it, it's hard to couldn't quite visualise how, whether it reads itself as part of the urban area or as something that's close to it. Let's look at it from the other direction there. How would it relate to the villages, Low Coniscliffe and Merrybent? Obviously, it wouldn't. The southern part would join down onto Coniscliffe Road, and there's already a housing development on the other side of Coniscliffe Road. So in that sense, the sort of the built form of Darlington and the built form of Low Coniscliffe would adjoin, would they not? Well, sorry, apart from the road, yeah. Yes, potentially, yes, there could be options for landscaping in that southern area to prevent that sort of joining up as much. But I think with that housing commitment already
in that area there is already some joining of the village to the urban area. That's site 340. I think there's, although a very small amount, the eastern edge of that site does already create some joining with the urban area.
Yeah, I suppose you feel your approach as you drive from along the main road from the west. Obviously, you'll hit the development on the northern side and on to your left as earlier than you do at present, wouldn't you? And the allocation on the other side of the road. Yeah. I think you've. Yeah, sorry. So I was just going to point out you've got that community woodland also to the west of Site 41, which would provide some sort of landscape and buffering to the development. That's a proposed local green space in the plan. Yeah, sorry. In terms of the Merry Bend, there clearly would be a separation maintained, wouldn't there? Because you've got that, as you say, you've got the local green space there, which is also yeah. So whilst it may, the physical join up of Low Coniscliffe and the urban area would clearly be closer. A gap, a more significant gap we retained with Merry Bend. Okay. There's not a requirement for any landscaping along the southern boundary, is there? Any sort of particular requirement?
I'll just check, sir. Sorry.
I don't want to be making.
I don't think there is, but
I don't. Yeah. Okay. We don't want to be making a policy on the hoof here. We'll get contributions from others as well, and then consider after that whether there's any need for any sort of modifications to development requirements. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So that's that. In terms of the accessibility to the town centre, again, it's a bit like these other urban extensions. You're going to tell, well, what will happen is that the roads ultimately will link up. That will form part of an orbital link. That will provide opportunities for buses, presumably through the sites. There are on existing bus services, Staindrop Road and Coniscliffe Road.
Yes, sir. There's existing services along those arterial routes into the town. Yes, so there's hope that there'd be opportunities to link those up through the site and potentially loop around. Yes.
And then you've got the at least two pedestrian and cycling routes. And it's, I suppose it's like you've said before, it's relative in the sense of you can't get closer to the urban area than putting it on the edge of the urban area. And then it's about the design development thereafter. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Biodiversity along the beck, is it likely to be affected, or is the requirements here to retain there's a requirement explicitly about biodiversity, isn't there? And you've talked about landscaping along the eastern edges of the sites.
Yeah, that's correct. So there's parts of the allocation statements reference. Site 41 talks about the local wildlife site to the east, Broken Scar, and also there's an interest in the area, potentially for great crested newts. So an ecological survey would be required to support a planning application. So it's a very similar situation, I think, in terms of Site 249, I believe. It discusses the record of great crested newts within the site, so ecological survey is required, and also just the general that wildlife friendly open space runs down that Beck Valley. So the idea is that those areas are protected and enhanced through the allocation and in line with those other policies within other environment policies within the plan.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. Agricultural land quality, that's been raised as an issue?
That was a consideration as part of the SA process through one of the objectives. Just checking my notes. Just a broken scar. I'm not quite sure on the exact classification, but yes, it was a consideration of part of the sustainability appraisal process.
Okay. Okay, fine. Let's see if others have got anything to say on that. In terms of the timing of the development, we've got the site promoters who will no doubt say things shortly, but Coniscliffe Park South, 30 dwellings a year from 22-23 onwards. So that's for 4 years, contributing towards the 5-year supply, 120.
Yes, that's correct, sir. Yes.
And then similarly, 30 a year for the northern side, but starting a year later.
Yes, that's correct, sir.
Sorry, six dwellings in the first year.
Sorry, 6 dwellings in the first year, then 30 in 25-26, and that's based on sort of developer, landowner evidence and information in terms of when they anticipate start. So that's why the reason for the 6 in the first year.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of the build out during the plan period, the assumptions of 420 and 630. So it's not the full development of the sites.
During the plan period, I've got 420 for year 41 and 516 for the northern site.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, yes, I mean, we've got Taylor Wimpey and Gladman here, and they can talk about their how they're going to progress the sites and the evidence there is for those. But in terms of the contribution they make to 5-year supply, the clear evidence that you have to show the contribution is that you've summarised in your appendix to the statement, and it's provided by the 2 site promoters.
Yes, that's correct, sir. And Taylor Wimpey agreed with our estimates on the southern site, and Gladman provided us with some more recent information, hence why we've updated the trajectory slightly on that northern site.
Okay, in terms of viability, I mean, I'll get the promoters again to say something about this, but again, this falls into the category of the northern, they're both marginal. One's shown to be just over the residual land value, just over the benchmark land value in terms of the typology. This is not site specific, this is the typology approach. And the other one's just under, based on the different sizes, I guess. But in terms of the outline applications, are they proposing to meet all the policy requirements in the plan?
I might have to seek a colleague's input on this one. If Mr. Coates has, I think there's no technical issues, right?
You can hear me, okay? Yeah. Hello again, sir. You'll appreciate we've had both of the applications in for some time now, between 18 months and 2 years, I think it is. So there is a degree of updating of those reports to take into account any decision made on the local plan, and particularly how it sort of gains precedence over the neighbourhood plan. There are some other updating issues in line of the National Planning Framework 2019 in relating to the neighbourhood plan, and more particularly on ecology. The ecology reports at that time, 18 months, 2 years ago, were deemed to be fine for an assessment, but clearly, as because of the time lapse, a little bit of extra work would need to be done to those to make sure they're still accurate and relevant. But other than that, yes, the scheme is compliant with any future local plan should it come forward. Yes.
20% affordable housing.
Yep.
And again, it's partly out of curiosity, when you've got an outline application, how do you secure the percentage of accessible and adaptable homes? Do you use planning conditions, or
that's what we were doing that particular instance? Yeah, there's it would probably, well, it would be inappropriate in my view to attach such a condition at RM or detailed level, and I think to cover both sites comprehensively, the tie-back condition would be included in the outline permission. That's how we'd secure it.
Even if all matters are reserved, you could still put that on as a principle.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Understood.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
I've done development management, but it's a long time ago.
Yes, but that's the process we will go through to take that into account. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. Right. Okay. So I don't have any more questions for the council. Let's get contributions from others. I'm going to start with the site promoters, just to sort of get their view, and then we'll get alternative perspectives on this. So, Mr. Longstaff again.
Thank you, sir. So obviously quite a few points to pick up there. As Mr. Court suggested, it's got quite a long history, this one, and we've been involved in it since 2015, I think. And I think your sort of first question was about why 2 applications. I think both Gladman and ourselves put pre-application requests in at the same time. The council encouraged us to then go and speak together, work together, and deliver a comprehensive master plan for the whole site, which we've done. Worked very collaboratively with all parties really since that time. But obviously mindful of the need to have 2 separate planning applications that allowed delivery of the respective sites, but worked jointly on infrastructure provision and in particular highways impacts. Just another probably point of interest for you, sir, is that there's also a collaboration agreement in the background between Gladman and Taylor Wimpey, which governs the delivery of some of that infrastructure and how things come forward. I think you picked up on the joining of the road as being an important point, because obviously we've been through the mill with outline applications, and those were actually listed for a planning committee in 2019. So there is a committee report recommending approval for both schemes. Obviously no technical issues. So we actually have also agreed full set of conditions, section 106 heads of terms. The conditions in relation to the link roads going to the boundary of each site was 300 dwellings on each respectively.
Right. Okay.
So all that information, all that detail, it's all there. In terms of the local plan process, I guess it kind of puts these sites at a significantly advanced stage in terms of demonstrating their deliverability. So I'll pick up on some of the sort of more detailed points, I guess, that you raised as well. Sort of the Baydale Bet Crossings, there's actually an existing crossing on the Taylor Wimpey side of the scheme, which ties into the public rights of way which run through the site. I think the intention was for another 2 crossings on the Gladman side, but I guess that they can obviously clarify that. But yeah, those links do already provide very strong pedestrian links to the recreational space on the other side of Baydale Beck, and then the housing area to the east that's known as Mowden. We obviously work very hard as part of the master planning process to maintain an extra buffer from that beck. It's a key piece of green infrastructure. I think it's identified in the council's green infrastructure strategy. I don't know whether you've got the master plan in front of you, sir. I think it was appended to some of our earlier representations. But yeah, all of the required buffers are there. The public rights of way are retained and enhanced. It delivers a lot of benefits in our mind. Yeah, same with the flood zone. Picks up the scheme that's gone through the outline planning process. It picks up the requirements of the flood zone next to Beck. The master plan also allows for a small buffer from Coniscliffe Road. It's picking up on that point as well in terms of landscaping on the southern boundary. We've had a look at biodiversity net gain, and yet again there's a piece of information submitted with the Regulation 19 representations that demonstrates the scheme can meet biodiversity net gain requirements. Ecology, Mr. Coates picked up on the ecology reports. We've periodically kept them up to date. I think the original application was actually submitted in 2017, so it's a bit longer than he remembered. Those were updated again in 2019 and are again being updated at the moment in anticipation of the application being taken forward to committee, hopefully in the near future. I won't go on any further than that, but if there are any sort of specific questions.
Okay. No, that's fine. In terms of the affordable housing, 20% is the proposal, yeah? Yeah, and that's all. So it's all factored into the heads of terms that actually the section 106 has actually started being drafted again in anticipation of the scheme being considered at a planning committee hopefully in the near future. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. That's helpful. Right. Gladman. Richard Agnew, is there anything? I mean, you don't need to go over the same things again, but is there anything further you want to say, particularly, obviously, about the northern site? Mr. Longstaff, do you want to turn your camera off? Yeah, Mr. Agnew.
Apologies, it's taking me time to log on there. No, there's nothing really that I want to cover further to what Mr. Longstaff covered in what he said in terms of the connections across the Beck. Yes, we are committed to providing those recreational links in, and I guess we see this the Baydale Beck as almost like a green link through the urban area as matters progress with the application and building out the homes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks for keeping it brief. And yeah, I've got all that information from the council and the site promoters' perspective, so that's helpful. Right, Joanne Garrick, please.
Thank you. Just the discussion that you had earlier on about the neighbourhood plan, just to clarify that the parish council did look at the two sites as part of the plan, didn't agree with the council's assessments, but they did see in the plan that they accepted it was a strategic matter to be dealt with through the local plan. So they don't agree with the sites, but you know and I think really just to acknowledge all the questions that you put to the council at first were the issues that have been raised by the parish council. So I won't go over all of them, you know, around the constraints and things, because you're aware of the submissions. But I think one of the main concerns of the parish council is that coalescence between the two. And you know, I've listened to the discussions from the developers, from the council, but it is about that conflict with the sort of the strategic approach of the plan, about keeping that distinction between the rural villages, and just there's real concern that will be lost as a result of the development, particularly with the relationship with site 340 as well, when you look at it together. So that is a really big concern of the parish council. That visual separation it's really important in the neighbourhood plan and was very important to the local community. And I think, like I say, I won't go over all of the other issues. You've seen the submissions about the concerns about highways and roads and flooding and biodiversity. So, you've got the parish council submissions on those matters.
Yeah, OK, thanks. In terms of the coalescence point, I mean, you heard my discussion with, let's talk in different villages. Low Coniscliffe, obviously, you've got the housing development that's taking place, or that's committed on the other side of the road. I don't know if it started or not, I can't recall. But then, obviously, I mean, there's been a suggestion, I think, from Mr. Longstaff that there would be landscaping along the southern part of the site to provide a more of a landscaped buffer. It's not a development requirement in the plan, and in some ways, maybe the applications are ahead of it anyway. So, but would that be something that would provide some mitigation from the parish council's point of view?
I guess it would depend on the level of that sort of the buffer, but that is really important in terms of reading that separation. But I guess it's the overall scale of the development when you look at it compared to two very small villages. That's the big concern.
But the visual impact would be quite limited in the sense that, obviously, well, clearly the further you go up from the Coniscliffe Road away, I mean, it becomes quite a long way away from surely the frontage is the key. I mean, it's a relatively modest extent of the frontage, and if that were well landscaped with with trees and hedgerows, I mean, it's quite a rural approach in at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, so yes, it is.
That's what the parish council would wish to try and retain as far as possible, or at least mitigates the harm.
Yeah, the character of the two settlements is very important again to the wider community as well.
Yeah. And in terms of Merrybent, then you've obviously got the local green space designation, which is in the neighbourhood plan, and it's confirmed in the local plan. So presumably you're supportive of that. Is there anything further in terms of the development requirements on the southern site around that you think is missing that would help to strengthen that particular relationship, retaining a kind of?
I think it is, as you said, it's the landscape, the relationship between. I know you've got the buffer with the local green space, but then that gap is important in the relationship with the Beck. So making sure that's embedded within the developer requirements is very important.
Actually, sorry, Part J of the policy requirements for the south site does refer to the frontage to the A67 being carefully designed in order to mitigate landscape and visual impacts. I don't think it says anything at the moment about landscaping along the western boundary of the site and in the interrelationship with the local green space. So maybe that's something that I'll ask the council to have a think about, but as I say, we'll go back. Anyway, thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thanks.
Mr. Madison.
Hello, sir. Thank you very much for that. I heard everything that's been said, and probably, and I don't want to go over it all again, but obviously I've got a list of bits and pieces. I appreciate that you didn't want to go over the service village, rural village methodology selection, but just to touch on that, Mr. Seabury made quite a strong, well, not a strong case, he talked about in the first week about School Aycliffe. School Aycliffe was taken out because it was classed as a rural village, and Merrybent and Lower Coniscliffe is exactly the same, and that one has remained in. Now, there is approximately a 500% increase of houses within that parish. That's a fact. If obviously when the total amount of houses go in, if, however, as you were suggesting before, and as clearly suggested, this is an urban extension, then does that mean that the parish council lines need to be changed within the wards of the borough council? And I think that's probably a bigger picture. Not quite sure what the answers are to that particular thing. So that's the only thing I would like to say on that. Following on in terms of previous local plans, which clearly have been updated, and I just made a note of something that Mr. Nelson said in the first week, that that basically this plan is a follow-on and there's nothing necessarily new coming in this new particular plan. The previous plans, and up until 2015, that particular site, both sites added together, were classed as difficult to development due to a number of strategic infrastructure issues. And that was always labelled with that site. Now, I appreciate that probably the detailed information that's been carried out of late is a little bit different from what's happening in those days. But what I would like to say is that there's been a HE-law that's been carried out, which I've got to say has got a number of issues that I feel have been correctly answered or answered incorrectly on the HE-law. Ms McCall's suggested that there isn't any transparency in that particular approach, and I've identified half a dozen questions that they've answered incorrectly. Just to point out one or two, the sewage treatment works that is mentioned is not a sewage treatment works, it is a water treatment works that produces 100+ million litres a day of water that serves Darlington and Teesside, and it has a chlorine storage which clearly has a hazardous zone around it, as an example. Now that to me is quite a fundamental difference in the answering of the questions. I would guess that the answers to the questions add up some sort of a matrix and it goes into the different categories. There is no transparency whatsoever to that, and I think, and that's been described by Ms McCall, that they just came to a conclusion that it's either yes or it's no. So therefore, for the last 25 years, that site has been identified and has always been identified as not appropriate for development. Why now, with some incorrect answers to some very clear questions, is it now acceptable? So really, as I say, I've sent a note with all of this on, and you've seen my my matter statement. I don't want to go on too much about any of this, but if you do read, obviously, the core document, number one, there is a number of different sort of statements about rural developments that, you know, smaller rural developments as defined in the settlement hierarchy are generally considered to be less favourable located for housing developments, and so on and so forth. There are many of them which have quoted all of the particular sections, so they've gone against really the policy, I suppose. Just one final aspect, and it's DBC 4, which was in response to a question that you actually raised, and there is now new areas being drawn up on the policy maps, which now are available for viewing, obviously, on the website. It doesn't, as suggested, it does not follow the Lower Coniscliffe and Merrybent local plan, as is suggested. So that, to me, is almost a straightforward, dare I say, lie. 1.91 and 1.92 talks about the Localism Act, which is way back in 2011, but is still valid, is still the law, and gives some power to the big society, and the local neighbourhood plan has got quite a right for communities to give them direct power to develop and share vision for the neighbourhood and share the development and growth of the local area, are the words. I've got to say that on the face of it, and I'm not close to the parish council or clearly the local plan, but that almost seems to me as if it's been brushed aside. And I really feel a little bit concerned that there is a law there, the Localism Act 2011, that has almost just been jumped over the top of. Some of the plans I've seen in the local plan, in the neighbourhood plan, have been prepared by Darlington Borough Council and shows that as open space. Obviously, I'm going back 2 or 3 years now, so I really wonder why it got passed, if that's the right term, and clearly passed by an independent approach. So I appreciate that there's been suggestions that we've always been said that there's going to be development in there. So how did the plan get passed? So really, that's it in a nutshell. And I'm sorry to rant on, but there are many, many, many different aspects. For example, the road between Coniscliffe Road and Staindrop Road will not make a ha'porth of difference to the volume of traffic that comes into the town. All it will do is it will just move it. So that in itself will not do the job. And if it was to go ahead, and hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, there is a substantial more road network required to go towards Faverdale, which presumably needs to be paid for by the 2 developers. So from a viability point of view, from a sustainability point of view, there are a number of issues. There are some very, very large strategic water mains that cross the site that, again, has been incorrectly answered in the HELAR. So, sorry, that's me finished. I apologise.
No, it's okay. Don't apologise. I want to hear people's views and the local knowledge that they bring. So thank you very much for that. Okay, thank you, Mr. Madison. Any final comments from the council in relation to these 2 sites before I move on? We've got 2 more to deal with this morning. Do you want to turn your camera off, Mr. Madison? Right. Anything further from the council?
Just a couple of points, if that's okay, sir. As far as we understand, the chlorine storage at the water treatment works is no longer there. As far as we understand, and just in terms,
consultees have been consulted, etc., in technical issues like that.
Yes, yeah, that's correct, sir. Yeah, and just in terms of interaction with the local green space. Proposed designation, I think we'd be willing to look to put something in. I don't think there's any requirement in the allocation statement with regards to the interaction with that at the moment, but that's certainly something we could look at. But just a final point, just to reiterate, it's not a case of we're totally disregarding the neighbourhood plan for Lower Coniscliffe and Merrybent. There's a lot of principles and policies within the neighbourhood plan that cross over to policies within the local plan and national policies. It's unfortunate that it's just this conflict with this site that I think is the main area of challenge, and it's not a case of us disregarding the neighbourhood plan.
In terms of the eastern edge of the boundary, obviously there's the interaction with the local green space. I can't remember if the local green space is it some sort of, it's been a community planted area.
Community woodland. So.
Yeah, and that's maturing presumably. In terms of what could take place around the edges of that on this site, then is something that could enhance that and create a sort of rural edge to the development. But equally, yes, going north and up the eastern boundary of the Coniscliffe north side. I mean, it may well be that the scheme, the outline application already deals with this, but there needs to be a creation there of a reasonable interface between the urban edge and the countryside, does there not? I'm not even sure it follows a field boundary, does it? The boundary. Yeah,
sorry, you're talking about the western edge of the site. Sorry, yes, western edge of the site. Yeah. There may be a 249. Let me just check the allocation statement because I think that was something that might be
let's
within
just think it as
there.
an action point for both the sites. Try to think about the whether there's a requirement for the landscape.
Yeah, there is.
So the northern one does
it
have
is-
a boundary, doesn't it, along the western edge? Yeah.
There is a mention in criteria L for
Yeah.
site
Yeah.
249.
So it's just
about that relationship. Yes.
So it's the southern site. Whether there needs to be something about the relationship with the local green space, I think, is the one, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. We'd be willing to look at that.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you. Let's move on then to the next site, which is Maxgate Farm. We've talked about Middleton St George and the service village, but let's look at this particular site, which we've already touched on. So this is for 260 dwellings. Mr. Madison, your camera's still on, I think. I don't know if you wish to turn it off. Middleton St George allocation, then, yeah, indicative yield of 260. This is site 99. And it's an expectation that development will start in 22-23 with 15 and then 30 per year after that, giving a total of 105 by 2026. Story homes have got the interest in this. Mr. Baker's here, he can talk us through that. There's an outline application, and he says there's no constraints, no outstanding technical matters with the application. So on that basis, the council and the site promoter presumably feel there's clear evidence that the development will go ahead in the timescales envisaged. So there's some issues around vehicular traffic. Obviously, we've talked about the discussion about the amount of development that's taken place around Middleton St George in the last few years, which it's been quite extensive, and there's issues now raised by the parish council about further development and the implications that would have for social infrastructure, but also traffic movements and the access to the site. So you could touch on that, and also if you could also about the sort of the setting of the rural setting of the village and how the development of this particular site would impact on that in terms of its relationship with the existing built form and the adjoining countryside and other open land. Is it Fiona McCall again?
Sorry, sir. No, it's myself. I wasn't sure whether you were asking Tom Baker that or the council.
No,
sorry
you
about
want
that.
to start, Mr. Nelson, and then we'll go over to Mr. Baker.
Mr. Hand, sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Hand, sorry. Do you want to turn your camera on? Mr. Madison, do you want to turn your camera off?
Sorry, can you hear me? Because I'm trying to turn it off and it doesn't seem to want to go off. So I'll attempt to.
Okay, thank you. Right, Mr. Hand, do you want to put your camera on?
My camera is on.
Oh,
Sorry.
I can't see it at the moment.
I'll turn it off and on again. So I'll turn it off and on again. Other people can see me. I don't know what the issue is, but anyway, it's ringing.
Don't worry, I can hear you.
Right. Okay. I don't want to go into the whole thing about spatial strategy and site selection in detail, but obviously our conclusions are that it is very genuine service village with the types of services you expect in a service village, the connectivity from public transport, both through rail and road. The site itself, as part of the HELAR process, we did actually, and I know Middleton St George are concerned about the amount of development, we did kick 8 sites out of selection through the HELAR process that we didn't include for Middleton St George. The site itself is bounded on the north by residential and to the east as well. We consider it to be a suitable site. The sensitivity test showed it as medium to low. So it didn't show it as a high value area for sensitivity. As far as Middleton's concerned, we've done recent research onto who's been occupying new developments, and 71.78% of the people were from outside the borough that have moved to Middleton St George, and that just shows a support for existing services that the village has, including the bus services. And the site itself has good cycling and footpath links to the major employment area in the town, and also the retail areas in the town as well. So it's got good connectivity. I don't see, when looking through the evidence, any compelling site-specific argument which would lead the council to remove the site. And it is now a full application. was an outline application that was pending, but hadn't been determined because of the local plan. But now they've actually come in with a full application, but Mr. Baker will probably be able to clarify a bit more on that.
Okay, thank you for that. In terms of access and safe and suitable access and the amount of cars, I mean,
there are no objections, but Mr. Casey might want to. There were no highway objections, and the access goes directly onto the road rather than going through any residential estates or anything like that. But again, Mr. Casey might want to confirm that.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Casey, do you want to just comment? I mean, obviously, the parish council are very concerned.
Yeah, just briefly, sir, just fully concur with what Mr. Hans just said. There's a safe means of access onto the local road network. The amount of development in itself wouldn't be sufficient to create issues within the village. There are parking issues within the village really on the main roads through, and we do have measures in our armoury to remove parking if it becomes an issue. And also just be mindful that the location of this site, it is to the western end of the village, yeah. And it does have good access directly onto very close to the A67, and a lot of the movements, certainly employment movements in the morning, will be out onto that road.
Okay, thank you. Right. Mr. Baker, do you want to just briefly? I mean, you don't need to repeat the things the council said. If there's anything further you want to say about the suitability of the site?
Thank you, sir. Well, I mean, we obviously there's nothing that the council said that we'd want to contradict. Yeah. We'd agree with all of the statements made. In terms of the planning application situation, so obviously a planning application in outline was submitted in 2016. That was considered over a number of years and was due to go to planning committee in 2019 with a recommendation for approval, and that planning committee report did go through all of the technical issues that have been raised through third-party representations and on the call this morning in terms of highways, in terms of flooding, design, ecology, heritage, and Section 106 obligations and infrastructure. And of course, that recommendation for approval was made in light of that assessment. Subsequent to that, about a month ago, a full and detailed planning application was submitted, which has updated the technical information that went in with the outline application. So we've got new technical information in respect of air quality, ecology, drainage, landscape and visual impact, noise, and crucially highways as well. So there is an update in terms of that sort of highways modelling and assessment work. That application is in, it's being determined. We're currently responding to consultees, comments and queries. And we anticipate that, as per the original outline application, that no technical issues will be found, and we should have a robust planning application in due course. I mean, I'm not sure if there's any specific questions or queries from our submission. Obviously, we've been over the various technical issues. I think in terms of highways, we'd concur with the conclusions of Mr. Casey in respect of there is a straightforward and safe access onto Station Road. Our transport assessment that's submitted with the application has looked at speeds on that road, it's looked at visibility on that road, and it's looked at a sort of road safety audit and historic injuries and accidents, and all of those factors lead us to conclude that this is indeed a safe access. In terms of accessibility, I mean, it is walking distance to the facilities in the village. We were talking about cycling earlier. I mean, it is very close to the national cycle route, and it's route number 14, which is the main route that takes you to all those employment facilities and services within Darlington. And that's obviously a sort of nationally managed network, which this site will have easy access to. In respect to the Stockton and Darlington railway line, the historic route of it and some of the assets associated with it, that's something that has been looked at through the original 2016 outline application. No issues were found in terms of impact on setting or any such like issues. We've obviously looked at that again. The layout can take into account the need, for example, for a setback distance from the Fighting Cock pub, which is on Station Road, which is associated with the railway line. We're not within 50 metres of the historic track bed, so again those issues have been looked at through the application.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think there's any. Oh, sorry. And one final thing in respect of the newly submitted full and detailed application, we've been through the emerging policy requirements of the local plan in respect of affordable housing, in respect of adaptable and accessible homes, and we've designed the new and detailed application to meet those policy requirements, and it can do so in full acknowledgement that the site is viable. And I think the fact that we've got a medium-sized regional house builder who's got experience of building in Middleton St George and in Darlington more widely, who's committed the investment to put in this new application, shows that the site is manifestly deliverable in that sense.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because obviously this is another site that falls within a marginal viability with a residual value of just below the benchmark land value according to the borough, the local plan viability assessment. But you're saying that, when you do a site-specific assessment, which you've done, and you can comply with all the policy requirements, the 20% affordable housing, accessible and adaptable homes, etc. So thank you for clarification of that.
Yes, I mean, in obviously the typology assessment that the council's done is more of a high-level assessment, and our clients looked at the the ground investigation issues, the infrastructure specifically required for this site, and it is a viable site.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Right. Any other contributions from this? Is Councillor Gilson still there, or?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, well, obviously we've submitted our comments on it all, but specifically in terms of what's been raised here, David Hand mentioned as a service village. Well, this is still disputed.
Okay.
Yes, and I'm just going to say they should meet local need, and this is not meeting local need. He says that 71% come from outside the borough. Well, this again is not meeting what the community need in the housing needs assessment for our local plan, neighbourhood plan. The housing need was 119 to 136 houses across the plan period. In terms of cars, this development would have 596 car parking spaces, which would it was sort of reliant on cars. In terms of traffic, the Highways England, in its previous iterations of the planning applications, Highways England put a number of holding recommendations on it. Was to ensure the A66 trunk road continues to serve its purpose as part of a national system of routes through traffic in accordance with whatever in the Highways Act, by minimising disruption and trunk road network and in the interests of traffic safety. In terms of village traffic impact on village roads, obviously they're village roads that are not and sort of not designed to cope with all this traffic. The parish council conducted traffic analysis, numbers of traffic, existing traffic, both at the north end of the village and the south end of the village. And the traffic movements from this site would equate to about 1,040 extra vehicle movements per day. but cumulatively with all the others, it would estimate the cumulative total would be 5,329. It's already unacceptable. The problems with parking, traffic flow, along Station Road, there are terraced houses which they don't have off-road parking. They have to park on the road, and that means the narrow village road, Station Road, is even more restricted. Sort of, yeah. What else was raised here? Yeah, there was other things as well, but I can't quite remember. But yes,
Well,
we've put it.
Yeah, sorry. I just have one question about the sort of the relationship in terms of, you said the allocation should be deleted, but if not, you need better policy in the plan to ensure that it's effectively delivered and in an appropriate way.
Right.
Looking at the, have you got the plan there? I mean, you presume you've looked at the development requirements for Site 99 in Appendix B of the plan. Is there anything there that is missing then that you think would be needed? Any issues not adequately addressed there in terms of mitigating? I know you don't want the development to go ahead, but if it is to go ahead, any sort of mitigation that's missing there that would help the parish council's point of view?
Well, I mean, it just everything makes it worse. In terms of the boundary, it goes past what is a natural boundary of the beck, and also that would create problems. It's not a natural extension to the village because there's obviously the water park with the reservoirs. That's the sort of natural boundary. So it's an extension into Greenfield. The 2015, where is it? SHLA found it to be unsuitable to development due to its location. There's been no biodiversity impact assessment. There's all sorts, really.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, was there anything further you wanted to say?
Well, I mean, obviously we're disputing it because of the lack of the neighbourhood plan housing needs assessment only recommends up to 136. But I mean, but the site itself, well, it's mainly, a lot of it's to do with the traffic impact.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Just come back to the council if there's anything they wanted to say. I mean, again, I'm not sure. It may or may not be necessary, but again, there doesn't seem to be any requirement in here to ensure a kind of to deal with the relationship between the western edge of the site and the countryside. As Councillor Gilson has just said there, there's a physical feature that crosses the site, which is a beck. But the development does seem to, well, the allocation extends across that. So, I mean, is there anything that's needed in the development requirements? I mean, it may be a bit academic now in the sense that there's a detailed application, but is there any expectation of landscaping along the western boundary to ensure that adequate relationship between the built form and the countryside?
Yes, sir. There's no requirement in that Appendix B. That doesn't mean that. I refer to Tom because he might have a bit more detail about the actual application. The other thing, just to comment on what the councillor said, the HELAR report did show the site as suitable and available. The HELAR that supports this plan rather than maybe an older one.
Yeah, understood. No, I suppose the question to you, Mr. Nelson, is it necessary for the Appendix B to include a development requirement relating to the landscaping of the western edge of the site?
Well, when we considered it, we obviously hadn't included it, so we felt that it didn't.
No. Okay. Right. I'll have a think. I don't know. I mean, Mr. Baker, I don't want to. I mean, you'll probably tell me that the detailed layout includes that.
As usual, you're one step ahead of us, Mr. Fieldhouse. The detailed application does indeed include a buffer along that edge. I mean, that's just sensible town and country planning, really. There is obviously an existing field boundary there, which has hedgerows and intermittent field boundary trees. We're looking to protect those and bolster that planting with additional hedgerow planting and such like. So that is something that the detailed application includes. Of course, we'd be willing during the planning application stage to discuss with the council further if they felt that, you know, tweaks and amendments were required. In respect of the beck, that is a prominent feature across the site, and again, our detailed layout takes that into account. And the beck area really is a focal point for the public open space within the site, as well as setback distances for ecological, landscape, and arboricultural reasons. Just one particular issue that was raised earlier in respect of Highways England. I think it was implied that there was some sort of holding objection on the previous application. That isn't correct. I mean, Highways England did comment on the previous application in respect of the A66, A67 junction, and a discussion was had and a preliminary agreement was had about a contribution towards those wider strategic improvements, which of course aren't just required for our site. In fact, they're larger requirements for this part of Darlington, and a preliminary agreement was made to contribute towards that through the 106. We haven't got to those discussions yet during the full application because of the stage we're at in the determination, but it's certainly not an issue of soundness with regards to this allocation. And furthermore, there's been no Highways England specific objection or comment on this allocation through the local plan process.
No, okay, thank you very much. Right, I'm going to move on then to the last site that we're going to discuss this morning, which is the Great Burdon allocation. If I could. So this is described as in the development requirements as an urban extension to the north of the main urban area. It's a total capacity for 750 with an indicative yield of 500 during the plan period. So I'll just go through some questions, and I think we've got Mr. Hall for Bellway and Mr. Baker for Story who've got interest in this site. Is that right? So just start with the council then. So the council's response to SQ16 includes a map showing a rural gap between Great Burdon and the main urban area. Sorry, let me just get. And this on now on the updated policies map. So you've got this sort of overlapping designation of rural gap and green wedge. So I suppose the first we can deal with this under ENV3, but the policy ENV3A seems to have the same development requirements for green wedges and rural gaps. So I couldn't quite. Why have an overlapping designation here? I suppose is the first question. Who's dealing with this from the council?
So I'll deal with this one again, sir. I didn't write the policy in relation to this, so would I be able to come back and clarify?
Okay, let's leave that. We can deal with that under ENV3. So I suppose the general question: is it appropriate for green wedges and rural gaps to overlap? I mean, I'm not saying it's not. It's just that obviously when the plan was submitted, the rural gaps weren't defined and they were left open as to where they would apply. And I think that was a bit unclear, really. So this has been clarified, but now you've got a position where you've got a green wedge and a rural gap that overlap to some extent, but one goes further than the other. And in fact, both they overlap in part, but they also extend in different areas. So let's deal with that. But okay, but in terms of the actual housing allocation, then So we'll come back to that EMV3. But in terms of the housing, the reason I asked about it is because there's a statement of common ground between the council, Bellway and Storey, which refers to the possibility of extending the allocation onto what is shown as a green wedge on the policies map, but also now as rural gap on the amended policies map. So the suggestion seems to be from the house builder that it may not be viable to develop the site without extending it in that way, due to the sort of infrastructure costs associated with the layout of the road from the A1150. So I suppose, obviously, I can only recommend a main modification if the submitted plan is not sound. You know, it's not my business to go around altering the plan just to make it different or better. So I suppose the question to think about carefully is the plan as submitted sound in terms of this allocation?
Sorry, so yeah, we consider it's sound. I mean, we have had discussions with the developer regarding the green wedge stroke rural gap in this location of Great Burdon. I mean, the intention in this location is really to separate the coalescence of any new development with the settlement of Great Burdon. And I think provided that gap is maintained to a sufficient amount that still protects that integrity of the settlement, then we are quite happy to discuss the alteration of that boundary without losing what the purpose of it is.
No, but that's not the question, is it? My question is the plan submitted sound? Because if it is, I'm not going to get into discussion about you could alter it and you could put the line somewhere else.
Right. Well, we believe the plan is sound in relation to this.
Yeah, you've missed the opportunity to make changes to change it. You know, that was done before you submitted it. We can only change it now if it needs to be changed to make it sound. So I just want to be clear about the council's position on that. The site could be viably developed in a satisfactory manner, as it is shown with the lines drawn on the policies map. Yeah.
Well, our understanding is that yes, it could. But I say if we dealt with a detailed application, that doesn't stop any of the development going on the green wedge, provided that even if it's shown as an allocation, the green wedge policy doesn't prevent anything happening.
Okay, so it could be, you could say, right, the plan sounds as it is, but actually when it comes to a scheme being put forward, there would be some room for negotiation if necessary. Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
Although it does rather beg the question of the green wedge policy. We'll come on to the green wedge policy. That's twice today now that we've had a suggestion that actually these green wedges could be built on, one because one's part of an allocation, and now this one adjoins an allocation, and you say you could alter the line, which seems a bit unclear, but okay, but the reason I asked that is because I just wanted to be clear about the council's view. I mean, I'll get the view from others in terms of whether they think it's sound as it is or not. Because obviously, if it isn't sound, there's a number of alternatives that it could be. One would be to delete the allocation, rather than amend the boundary to it, depending on what I thought about the overall supply and the housing requirement, etc., etc. But anyway, we won't go there at this point in time. In terms of accessibility, again, it's a similar sort of issue raised at the moment. Obviously, this is it's on the edge of the urban area. How could the future residents have good access to the job services at town centre, etc., other than by private car? Do you want to just briefly say what the response to that is? It's probably similar to other sites, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the requirement to have a link road through the site, which will allow public transport penetration. The road to the south of the site, which divides the site from the major employment site in the town, that actually has already good cycle and footpath links, so we'll be able to link into that. That takes you directly into the town centre, but also to all the employment land that is adjacent to the south of the site.
Okay, thank you. So there's heritage assets on the site.
Yeah.
It's a scheduled monument, and there's ridge and furrow areas. So is that dealt with in the development requirements adequately, and they can be protected and enhanced?
Yeah, there's a requirement for archaeological assessments, and the scheduled monument will be designed in the scheme to protect its setting. I think Henry might want to comment on that, but we have spoken to Historic England about that and the monument, and as part of the heritage impact assessment.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the timing of development, you're not expected to start until 26, 27, according to your response to SQ5. The developers may say that they're going to start earlier. So in that sense, but you're not making any assumption about the contribution to 5-year supply at the moment, are you?
No. We have had further discussions with the developer very recently, and we believe they are working up a scheme. Again, Mr. Hall will be able to confirm that. So it might be that it is delivered quicker than our conservative estimate.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll come back to issues about the 5-year requirement, 5-year supply, and the extent to which it's a cautious estimate or it's a optimistic estimate of supply. And you can refer me to specific allocations if you wish at that time, such as this, if you think that there's there needs to be sort of some sort of reassurance to be given on that. Okay, anything further from the council's point of view about this, the allocation, the development of this site?
No, sir. Only to mention that the schedule does identify other things such as flood risk, and the design would take that into account. But no, not unless you want anything further from me, sir.
No. Okay. Thank you. Right. Let's get the site promoters' perspectives on this. You've heard my questions to the council. You could deal with those insofar as you wish to. Who wants to go first?
Can you see me, sir? James Hall.
Yeah, Mr. Hall.
I was just
I can't
checking.
see you. I've got
I know there's video problems, isn't there?
Yeah, but I can hear you. So.
Okay. Just a small bit of context, as we've been engaged on this site for a few years now. Or there's a full technical consultant team on it. So all of the relevant assessments have been done.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of iterations of a master plan been shared with the council, and that was on the basis of understanding, let's just call it the parameters or the likely boundary of the site.
Yeah.
I was even engaged back at the core strategy stage where it also had albeit a smaller allocation effectively. So the principle is well established. There's been lots of work gone into it. So I don't want you to get the impression in any way that it's not deliverable, and these builders have been on board a while, with clear intent. So what we are, if you like, our representations were based on extensive work, obviously similar to the work done by people who've got planning applications in, really. Yeah. So we have avoided Burdon Hill. We are expecting to factor in the SAM, which we've got a lot of knowledge about, and our World War II decoy. It was for bombing. And then, as you know from the earlier discussion, really all our point was that it crossed two ward boundaries, and that we thought that the southern ward had a lower value than the northern ward, which was higher. And that's fairly obvious, to be honest, if you just looked into it or went on site without going too much into it, just slightly higher values to the north.
Yeah.
And then, so really it just brings us to this issue that there's a couple of technical issues, one of which is a pipeline, and obviously we've got pylons as well.
Yeah.
But the pipeline was the main reason for coming up with this boundary point up by Burdon Village. Was we have done heritage assessments, etc., clearly well aware of the assets. But the point we were making was there's an easement for a pipeline, which for us, albeit not your traditional hedgerow boundary, it seems like a logical defensible boundary, because no one's ever going to be able to breach the pipeline easement. We'd happily put hedge alongside it or a fence or something if that was deemed appropriate. And in discussions with the council, who've been very reasonable and understand the point, that's really how we arrived at this tweak to the boundary. But we fully accept through the application process, we'd have to, go through all the usual tests and further liaison with officers and English Heritage if need be. So it wasn't something that made the allocation fundamentally unsound. It's just one of those classic planning issues where it's more logical, because you'll see that where the line that was drawn was far less it wasn't straight as you need to have for an easement. But we think it can be designed out. The council have agreed. I take your point about we haven't done it in time to get the boundary amended.
Yeah.
But we didn't, it's a question of semantics here. We're not saying it fundamentally alters the plan, but And it might be that you just comment, well, that's a matter for you to discuss. You know, I note the council, your common ground statement, but that's really, if that was concerning you, it was just genuinely through a design iteration process and perhaps not everybody being aware of the easement. Do you want me to just touch on the numbers as well, the delivery, or do you want me to?
No. Anyway, thanks for the clarification about that, and I'll have a think about the sensible way forward about that in terms of the pipeline of the easement and the extent of the allocation. And obviously, I mean, it's about efficient layout, I suppose. But
yes, saying, exactly. Yeah. If I was to show you, I know you won't want it, but if I showed you the block layout plan.
Well, I think I've got that. You've submitted it.
Yeah, we've put a version in, haven't we? But then if you've had time to look at that, you'll see that it's just. The best way I can put it is it would be clumsy layout planning if we didn't follow the easement and we end up with slightly different incursions. So it does, as you've alluded to already, you lose a few units and in the higher value part of the site, but which is unfortunate. Yeah, but we are talking about 60 dwellings per annum because there's 2 builders. I mean, technically Bellway have two brands now, but we are just talking about 2 builders, 60, so it's 30 each per annum. We think we can get on site in early 23, but I accept that the council chose not to put it in the 5-year land supply for now, but we've had further discussions, and if you like, they now believe us. But it's but it's a site that we're both builders are keen to press on with, and no doubt Tom Baker's about to say that for Story Homes. I don't think you raised any other specific queries because we've got reams of information on all topics, but I could just add that we've done another ecology survey for Great Crested Newts, a DNA survey recently. There's been ongoing surveys every year, and it came back negative. Because I mean, I'm not suggesting you have to remove the clause in the policy, or the appendix, but. So far, we don't think there's Great Crested Newts, but if that was concerning you, but that's N in the list of criteria. So we will no doubt have to do another survey to keep it updated.
Yeah, okay.
Is that okay for now?
So,
I'm happy to answer anything else.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Baker, any further perspectives from the Story Homes point of view and the southern part of the thing?
Very minor, really, in respect of obviously we're working collaboratively in respect of this site. So there is a statement of common ground jointly signed and prepared by Bellway Homes, Story Homes, and the Borough Council, which agrees matters of of a technical nature, a policy nature, and in terms of infrastructure and trajectory. So. As Mr. Hall has said, there's a long history of collaborative working on this site, and we'd concur with all the specific issues that he's raised. I mean, in terms of this site specifically, it has been known about and targeted for growth since the core strategy in 2011. It's part of the Eastern Urban Fringe growth area within the 2011 core strategy. So. In principle, as part of a direction of growth for the borough. I mean, it's a long-standing growth area in that respect. Obviously, in terms of the specifics around the green wedge policy, as Mr. Hall has suggested, our preference is for that to be addressed through an amendment to the green wedge specifically, rather than the slightly fudged, if you like, solution of allowing development within the green wedge. It's the cleaner way to do it. It makes for a more transparent and readable development management process when this development plan is actually used by development management officers and community members alike in terms of understanding the direction of growth in that area. So that would be our preference. As set out in our Matter 4 statement.
Yeah, okay. I think that maybe what would help me if the council could just do a very brief note for the green wedge designation and the rural gap discussion that we have next week, as to whether the boundary of those 2 designations as shown on the amended policies map is justified, having regard to physical features or physical features that could be logically created, reflecting what Mr. Hall said about the pipeline and the easement, etc. And that may well show that there would be a gap then between the sensible edge of the green wedge and the rural gap that fell between a bit of white land that falls between the housing allocation as submitted and the justified boundary of the green wedge rural gap. A plan being included would help. I would then have to make a decision, wouldn't I, about, well, what would be the sensible approach on the policies map to that bit of land that fell between the two designations. So is that, Mr. Nelson, is that something that could be done?
Yeah, sorry, it's Mr. Hand again.
Sorry, Mr. Hand.
Yeah, we'll do that before next week.
So it's not about extending the housing allocation. It's about a logical boundary to the green wedge and the green and the rural gap. You see what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, we'll do.
Right. Thank you. And in terms of Mr. Hall, Mr. Baker, again, you may wish to comment again. Mr. Simpson's viability assessment typology includes this in the Greenfield 1000 urban extension, which his assessment shows would be that the residual land value would be below the benchmark land value. So it'd only be marginally, well, it would be marginally unviable, I suppose. Any comment?
I can go first. I mean, as you'll have picked up, we lose a few plots with this boundary issue, but you know, the devil's in the detail, sir, as I'm sure you understand, and it will affect viability slightly, but not fundamentally. Is really what we were saying today and on day one. But
no, I suppose what I'm saying, irrespective of that, overall, I mean, as I said, the council's viability evidence, CDO8, seems to show that this site would fall within a typology that was only marginally viable, based on the methodology Mr. Simpson used. Is that your understanding, or is it something that you're more confident about would be viable in the sense of being able to deliver all of the policy requirements?
Yeah, I mean, we are intending, and we think we will deliver on all the policy requirements. It was, I think, because you were talking about benchmark land value earlier, weren't you?
Well, I hope we've moved on from that now.
No, I was just going to say we have a landowner who's very much in the loop. And understanding, so that, I mean, you know, there are 2 or 3 ways to deal with these things, but we have a landowner who's aware of the policy requirements, so yes, it can all be delivered. It's Durham Cathedral landowner, so right. You know, we will be delivering the affordable housing, for example, and lifetime homes, etc. They would want us to.
Yeah. Okay.
Just to give you some reassurance, but it's yes, it's viable. I mean, the 2 builders are very keen, and we're both here today, so hopefully that demonstrates.
Yeah, it's just, you know, how reconciling what the local plan viability assessments shows with what the allocations actually are, isn't it? You know.
Yes. But there's been a lot of careful thought gone into this proposal, as you can tell. You know, we've both alluded to the fact that it's grown in scale since the core strategy, and we've got a lot more information on. Yeah. Well, we've got information on everything basically now, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so,
Mr.
yes.
Baker, you agree, I assume?
Yes, so obviously our Matter 4 statement has a statement of common ground and an infrastructure delivery plan, which identifies the key elements of infrastructure required to deliver the site, and those are understood and costed for within the appraisals of our clients. So yes.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Right. Any final comments or questions from anyone before we close? Programme Officer saying Councillor Gilson, she's not got her hand up. Is there something further you wanted to say?
Yes, thank you. I was hoping to just come back and correct a couple of issues on the Maxgate Farm one, which I was, in fact, yeah, just quickly. Yeah, in fact, Highways England have issued another holding recommendation on this particular application. Also, the site, there's part of the Roman Road in the site, which is an undesignated heritage asset. And regarding the public road rights of way. There are 2 public rights of way that go through the site, and they would be built over. Even though in the application it said that they would be incorporated, this is not the case. The development would actually go over them, and they link to the wider network, which goes through the water park and through the wider network. So, and in terms of deliverability, it's unlikely that that site will be built within the time period, because currently there are 496 dwellings still to be built, and those are commitments in Middleton St George.
Okay, thank you. Right. Any other further comments? Mr. Madison's got your hand up. Is there something further you wanted to say, or is that a leftover? I think my technology is beginning to break down. Mr. Baker, have you got your hand up?
I'm sure you don't want us to sort of keep going over tit for tat in terms of the technical issues raised, but of course the planning application that we've submitted in respect of Maxgate Farm, the detailed application includes a desktop study of heritage assets. It includes a geophysical survey, and those assets can be adequately accommodated within the layout with normal mitigation measures applied. Certainly, it is not a soundness issue that would in any way undermine the sort of the fundamental natures of what is a sustainable site.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, so we'll finish this session there. There are potentially a number of action points that we have identified. I'll clarify. I might go through them now, and we'll clarify at the beginning of the afternoon. But no doubt the council's made a note. Well, I think I will do that because it might be helpful for some of those to be picked up and clarified. Okay, so unless there's any other questions or comments, we'll finish there. This afternoon, quite a few of you will be back, I'm sure. We're dealing with other aspects of housing supply. We'll pick up any of the other allocations that have not been talked about if necessary. I don't think I've got any particular issues with them. I want to talk about the other elements of the supply, including the commitments, windfall assumptions, look at the overall supply for the plan period and how it relates to the housing requirement, which we've got the figures for, and also get into the 5-year requirement and supply and what the plan shows about that at the present time and how the trajectory indicates that may change over the planned period. So that's what we'll be dealing with this afternoon. Okay, so thank you for the contributions this morning. We'll finish there. You will need to exit to leave this meeting, and there was a separate link to join the session this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Thank you.